Chapter 469. After another 2 days, Yun Yang's injuries were getting better, and he could already stand up. Although he still could not exert any strength in his broken leg, he could already limp a little. This was undoubtedly a huge improvement. What made Yun Yang even happier was that the agony in his mind, the agony that had been gnawing at his bones, had almost disappeared. Yun Yang felt that his injuries were getting better and tried to channel some mystical qi again. Although his organs were still torn apart, and it was difficult to channel it, he did not spit blood this time. Instead, there was a faint sense of qi in his dantian. Another night, and I'll be able to channel mystical qi. Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath. He was truly relieved. Yun Yang was actually very worried that his mystical qi would be crippled as well. But it seemed that everything was fine now. For the entire night, Yun Yang had been stabilizing his breathing. The tingling sensation that coursed through his body made Yun Yang feel blissful. In Yun Yang's eyes, his injuries were finally starting to show signs of improvement. The latter half of the night, in the pitch-black room, Yun Yang grunted abruptly. 2 beams of light shot out from his eyes amidst the pitch-black space. In the dimly lit cottage, a lightning-like radiance flashed in the illusory room. His dantian sea of qi that had been unconnected for 7 days and 7 nights suddenly had a weak energy that pulsed faintly. Then it rose slowly and reappeared in Yun Yang's senses. Amidst Yun Yang's inexplicable joy, his meridians slowly circulated along the route of the endless divine art that he had long determined. His shattered meridians had just been repaired, so they were still very tender. Yun Yang channeled his mystical qi slowly through them with extreme care. Yun Yang's meridians, which could have gone through hundreds of circulatory cycles in a single breath, were only able to complete a single circulation from late at night to daybreak. Yun Yang exhaled heavily, spitting out a mouthful of blood. It was not the reverse flow of blood in his meridians, but the blood clots that had been forced out from the circulation of his cultivation method. Just this mouthful of blood was enough to heal 10% of Yun Yang's internal injuries. Seeing that his injuries were getting better, Yun Yang dared not slack off. He continued the second cycle, the speed slightly faster than before. The inexplicable energy in his body gradually returned to Yun Yang's meridians along with the mystical qi, repairing his damaged meridians swiftly. As he continued to cultivate, Yun Yang slowly entered the state of oblivion that he had not experienced for a long time. The old physician woke up early in the morning and came to Yun Yang's room to take a look. He saw his patient lying flat on the bed, his breathing abnormally even, with barely visible intervals between each exhale and exhale. A layer of white air was slowly rising from his body. As the white mist rose like the morning mist, the bruises on his face also slowly faded. Such a heavy injury was actually recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, the old physician could not help but be shocked. He instantly thought of some legendary figures. Could it be that the person I saved is actually an extraordinary person? A general in the military? But this person is obviously very young. He's definitely not someone who can maintain his youthful looks like the legends say. As the mystical qi circulated, the endless divine art was slowly activated. Yun Yang's original appearance was revealed as well. Looking at the face that was slowly showing its delicate features, the old man dared not believe that the person before him was some important figure. The person before him was too young indeed. Even if he was compared to the 12 youths who had just left the village, he would not be much older. The endless divine art. Ceaseless thought, ceaseless growth. Ceaseless qi, ceaseless growth. Now, Yun Yang could truly be considered to have entered the unique cultivation state of the endless divine art. Ceaseless thought. Ceaseless thought. Yun Yang's body was gradually enveloped by the white mist. It was as if a giant steamer had appeared in the room. His meridians were recovering bit by bit, gradually becoming smoother and more flexible. As the meridians strengthened, the speed of mystical qi circulation increased as well. When noon came, a peculiar cracking sound came from Yun Yang's body. It was the sound of his dislocated bones returning to their original positions in an instant. The moment they were restored, his internal organs churned immediately. Yun Yang opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of purplish-red blood. What followed was a series of violent panting, Although this action had forcefully interrupted the cultivation method that was being channeled, it had also forced out most of the extravasated blood in his body. After spitting out the purplish-red extravasated blood, Yin-yang felt more than twice as light as before. Instinctively, he wanted to get off the bed. Just as his broken leg touched the ground, an excruciating pain and a soreness that seemed to penetrate into his bones assaulted him simultaneously. Yin-yang endured the pain and realized that he could actually stand steadily, but he still could not move one of his legs. As long as I can start again, I can be at ease. Everything after this will all come back to me. The day of Yin-yang's return is not far away. Yin-yang's gaze was determined. He still could not contact Emmy, and the manifestation power of the Nine Supremes was almost non-existent. His cultivation methods like the holy water charm could not be executed either. It was as if they did not exist at all. However, Yin-yang firmly believed that his various abilities would return sooner or later. The most important thing now was still to recover. He had to recover his body to its optimal state before discussing the follow-up. When the old physician returned from seeing a patient, he realized that Yin-yang, who had been lying on the bed yesterday, was already pacing slowly in the yard. Yin-yang had even greeted him with a timely smile when he saw him. The old physician was even more astonished, his eyes wide and mouth agape, his heart pounding in fear. Wasn't this progress a little too fast? It was such a serious injury, especially that leg. It was clearly broken. He had personally confirmed it and fixed it with his own hands. Why did you come out? Your leg has just been broken, you mustn't be impatient. You need to rest quietly. If you act so hastily and leave any sequelae, it'll be a lifetime of regret. Yin-yang smiled warmly and said gratefully, "Thank you, old sir, for your concern. However, I know myself. I can only recover better and faster if I move around more. Besides, I can't wait anymore." Yin-yang's gaze was distant. The child knows to go to the battlefield. How can I spend my days here leisurely? It's a waste of time. Yin-yang's voice was filled with murderous intent. Although the unique manifestation power of the Nine Supremes could not be unleashed now, could it not be that Yin-yang's own strength could not kill? Another 3 days passed. Yin-yang felt that his cultivation base had recovered by 1/10, while his body was fine. Although he still could not fight intensely, traveling was no longer a problem. However, Yin-yang still chose to stay for another day. The purpose of him going to war was to kill the enemy, to go to the battlefield. He could not let others protect and take care of him. Therefore, even if it was necessary to go to war, he had to have the ability to do so. It was not enough to just have the heart. As his meridians were unblocked, Yin-yang's cultivation base recovered faster and faster. In addition, Yin-yang could now open his spatial ring with mystical qi. In the spatial ring, there was a top-grade medicine from the Xianhuang world that he obtained from Lei Dongtian. It was extremely effective. Yin-yang gulped down 6 bottles in one go without hesitation, immediately feeling extremely relaxed and in good condition. The only thing that troubled him now was that his broken leg and arm had yet to heal. Most importantly, the divine edge was also in his deific consciousness space. After losing the connection with Emmy, his subconscious could not be opened or even probed. Naturally, the divine edge could not be retrieved either. What a great loss this time. Under the winter sun, Yin-yang slowly summed up his previous behavior bit by bit. I was still too impulsive. However, if things were to be repeated and I heard that old Dugu has been captured and is about to be executed, should I go? Yin-yang thought about it and chuckled bitterly. Even if things were to be repeated, I'd still go. I'd still be impulsive, because this is a family that I can't abandon. Knowing the outcome, I'd still go. What if I knew that this was a trap from the 4 countries before I went? What if I knew that the country would be facing such a critical situation before I went? What if I knew that the country would be besieged on all sides? What if the country was in danger of being destroyed? Yin-yang's heart was filled with contradictions. His impulsive mentality still held the upper hand, but his rationality told him that he should not go if that was the case. If he did not go, no matter what the reason was, be it for the country or the people, the condemnation of his conscience would follow him for life. A man's greatest hatred is an unfaithful wife and an unfilial son. A man's greatest helplessness is that it's hard to be loyal and filial at the same time. Yin Yang heaved a deep sigh. At this moment, he could empathize with these words. It was fortunate that he was not ambushed in the sky above the battlefield. If Mr. Nian had not intercepted him midway, and had chosen to wait for him on the battlefield, he, one of the 9 Supremes, would have been killed on the spot under the watchful eyes of millions of Yutong's soldiers, unable to retaliate at all. The morale of the army would have been reduced to nothing in an instant. If that happened, Yutong would truly be done for. On this very night, the old physician watched Yun Yang pack his things quietly and asked worriedly, Are you leaving now? Your injuries? The old man's eyes were filled with worry. From his point of view, Yun Yang could not move at all. No matter how he recuperated, he would need at least 2 to 3 months. However, Yun Yang had made up his mind and was determined to leave. He could not stop him no matter what. Chapter 470. It's all right, Yun Yang said with a smile. Don't worry, old man. My injuries are fine now and I have medicine with me. I'll need at least half a month to reach the battlefield in my current state. This half a month's time is enough for me to recuperate. The elder sighed. Rushing on the road and recuperating from his injuries were originally contradictory actions. If one were to travel at full speed, it would be extremely rare for one's injuries to not worsen. How could one recuperate while traveling? What nonsense, what a self-deceiving way of saying. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only let it be. Seeing that Yin Yang had made up his mind, and that it was useless to stop him, the old physician said softly, Perhaps you can choose to take a slight detour. You'll see a grassland after going over this mountain we're at. As long as you don't go too deep into the forest, you won't encounter any dangerous mystical beasts. Yin Yang asked. What did the elder mean by saying this? Time was running out now, and he still wanted him to take a detour? Even if there was no danger, it was still a completely different choice. Could there be another meaning to it? On that vast grassland, there are herds of wild horses. The elder said, there are at least hundreds of thousands of them, maybe even more. Since you have a profound cultivation base, it shouldn't be difficult to capture a wild horse. I believe it'll be a great help to this journey if you have an extra leg. No matter what, it can save you some energy to recuperate. Yin Yang was hit with a sudden realization when he heard the explanation. He then recalled that almost every family in this small village had horses, and each of them was an outstanding breed. When the 12 teenagers had left, the war horses that they had brought along were all of superior quality. So this was the root of it all. I'll go take a look. Yin Yang was tempted. With his leg in this state, it would save him a lot of energy if he had a good horse. Late at night, Yin Yang left quietly, not informing the rest of the villagers. Only the old man was there to send him off. Unexpectedly, when the elder sent Yin Yang out of the door, he realized that half of the village had come. She stood quietly in the night sky, watching Yin Yang leave. A few old men trembled as they stepped forward. Behind them were a few women. The old man took the 2 parcels from the women and said sincerely, Warrior, you're going to the battlefield to fight for Yutong. You must be careful. My generation is old and weak, and can no longer set foot on the battlefield. The women at home have worked overnight to make 10 pairs of cloth shoes, 20 caddies of flatbread, and a harness. This is just a small token of our appreciation. Please accept it to strengthen your morale. Looking around, Yun Yang could clearly see that there were a few women in the crowd who were paying special attention to him. Each of them had a small parcel in their hands. Those women were the mothers of the 12 boys who had left. Yun Yang felt a sudden surge of warmth in his heart. There was a heartfelt envy that he could not suppress. Up until now, what Yun Yang had desired the most in this life of his was the care of his family. He did not know if it was a trick of the heavens. But not only had he lost his parents since he was young and lost his blood ties, every family that Yun Yang had acknowledged until now had a difficult life. The 9 Supremes, Yun Zuiyu, and old Dugu had all had a hard time meeting him again. Jilingxi and Yurulan had inexplicably provoked a peerless expert like Lei Dongtian, and had not been able to return to their original selves for years. All of these seemed to be telling those who were close to Yun Yang that there were no exceptions, no exceptions. However, it was also because of this that Yun Yang was even more envious of those who were cared for by their family, cherishing that care even more. Thank you. Yun Yang accepted the parcel solemnly and carried it carefully on his back. He bowed deeply. Thank you. Take care, my fellow villagers. If I can survive this battle, I shall come back to reunite with all of you again. Warrior is no ordinary man. You will be able to make a name for yourself on this trip. You will be conferred the title of Marquis and General in the next dynasty, a Duke and Marquis for generations to come. It is truly heaven that Yutong is not going to perish in this war. The few elders looked at him solemnly, their voices sincere, as if they were making an oath. At this time, the mothers of the children walked out together. Warrior is the teacher of those children. The mothers of those children know that Warrior is leaving, so they have to do their best. However, Warrior has 2 hands and is injured, so you can't carry too much. This old and useless one has made the decision to let each of them sew 2 pairs of cloth shoes. Please don't mind, Warrior. Fill them in your luggage. Yun Yang's Adam's apple bobbed, not knowing what to say. 24 pairs of cloth shoes with 1,000 layers of soles were placed neatly in front of him. Each pair was sewn with the sturdiest linen thread, the stitches meticulous. The soles were the real 1,000 layers of soles made from home starch. The uppers were made of the sturdiest metal thread snakeskin. Lastly, the upper was the most common and soft fabric, but there was a thin layer of cotton sewn inside. Although it was not aesthetically pleasing, it was definitely sturdy, comfortable and durable. This was the most practical and best parting gift. It was also the most homely gift Yun Yang had ever received in his life. Thank you. Yun Yang bowed solemnly and said, if I can meet a few young fellows on this trip to the military, I'll do my best to watch over them. I hope that all 12 of them can return safely. The 12 women bowed at the same time, their eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you for your care, teacher. Their attitudes were so pious. It was as if a promise from the person before them could ensure the safety of their sons amidst the thousands of soldiers. Yes, at least to them, this promise was undeniable. In reality, however, even if Yun Yang had not lost the power of the 9 Supremes, he dared not guarantee the safety of anyone on the battlefield. He could only say that he would do his best, that he would do his best. Have a safe journey, Warrior. May you succeed. The entire village, old and young, women and children, bowed at the same time, their voices sonorous. Defeat Dongxian, strengthen Yutong. Bless our people, protect our people. Yun Yang, who was carrying a huge bag, bowed solemnly as well. Then he strode away, just like the 12 youths that day, without turning back. Because he knew that everyone was looking at his back. The more determined he was, the more confident he was. If he were to turn back now, it would only make him look guilty and cause them to doubt the safety of their children. This was not a situation Yun Yang would like to see. Yun Yang's silhouette finally disappeared at the intersection, just like the 12 youths that day. No one knew when he would return. Up until now, no one in the village had moved. Only soft sighs came from the mouths of the people. What a fine young man. The old physician sighed and did not continue. After a long while the crowd dispersed. When they returned home, everyone in the family couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. On the table of each household, there were 2 heavy ingots of gold. Each ingot of gold was at least 10 taels. 2 ingots of gold could at least ensure that these families would not have to worry about food and clothing for the next few years. Everyone went out to inquire, only to find out that each household had 2 ingots of gold. There was nothing more, nothing less. No one doubted the origin of the gold. Everyone knew that the gold had been secretly placed in his house by the warrior who had just left. However, no one had noticed when he had done it. Other than the 2 ingots of gold, there was also a letter on the old physician's table. There were a few lines of cursive handwriting on the letter. Pearls and jade are not as valuable as the human heart. How can gold buy deep feelings? The young serve the country. The women and children continue to make a living. Do not despise this small token of my appreciation. I shall do my best to ensure the safety of the children in this village when I go to the battlefield. Rest assured, father and elder. When the day of victory comes, we shall drink together. We shall not return until we are drunk. That is the joy of life." There was no signature at the bottom. However, the old doctor knew who wrote it. His body trembled and tears of excitement filled his eyes. He then took out the note and showed it to everyone in the village. Everyone was indescribably grateful, and their hearts felt a lot more at ease. The warrior knew that without the young men in the village, it would be difficult to make a living in the future. However, with the gold he had left behind, it was enough to ensure a stable and prosperous life for the entire village. Even if the war were to last for 3 to 5 years, the gold would be enough. His arrangements were meticulous to the extreme. This person is meticulous and has a profound mystical skill. His actions have the bearing of a successful person. I wonder who he is. Our small village is actually fated to be acquainted with such an important person. It is truly a blessing from the heavens. An elder sighed softly. Yun Yang left Yellow Pass village and headed east, coming to the mountain that the old physician had mentioned. Yun Yang, who had regained his mobility and a portion of his mystical skill, climbed up easily. In less than an hour, he was already at the top of the mountain. Looking down, all he could see was darkness. However, since he was already here, there was no need to turn back. He climbed down carefully. When he reached the foot of the mountain, there was a thick layer of snow and thick, withered grass beneath it. There seemed to be the sound of galloping horses coming and going from afar. This place was truly a natural horse farm. Even though it was the middle of winter, the horses were still galloping merrily. To be fair, the old physician had indeed given Yin Yang the best choice. Yin Yang had lost all of his manifestation powers. Although his mystical skill had recovered, it was still a long way from completion. If he were to travel to the eastern border with only 2 legs, it would be difficult for his injuries to recover, even if he could reach it in half a month. However, if he had a good horse as a means of transportation, the situation would be vastly different. Otherwise, Yin Yang would not have come here to find a mount that suited him, as the old physician had suggested. At dawn, the sky shone brightly once again. Chapter 471. The herd of wild horses was endless, uncountable. The horses stopped in the middle of the meadow, where there was a huge geothermal hot spring lake that was emitting hot steam. It was probably because of the existence of this geothermal hot spring that the natural stud farm was full of life, and was not afraid of the harsh cold. Beside the hot spring lake, the water and grass were even more abundant, not inferior to that of spring and autumn. Some of the horses jumped into the water and swam around, but most of them were grazing quietly, wagging their tails in a leisurely manner. Even Yin Yang was affected by the tranquil atmosphere. For a moment, he did not want to disturb the horses' peace and tranquility. However, at this moment, a long neigh came rumbling from afar. The horses by the lake were immediately alerted, neighing with their heads held high. Their eyes looked into the distance, as if something was amiss. Snow fluttered in the air from afar as another large herd of horses galloped over. Their target was obviously the hot spring lake as well. The horses here retreated slowly, leaving only a snow-white steed standing at the front with its head held high. This horse was a full head taller than the other steeds, and its body was almost 5 feet long. Just by standing there, the tall, long-legged, and extremely sturdy white horse gave off the aura of a powerhouse that could hold the fort against 10,000 enemies. It was so abundant and unstoppable that no one could compete with it. It seemed to be conveying a message. As long as I am here, don't even think of invading the stud farm. The rumbling from the other side was getting closer, heading straight for the hot spring lake. However, with a long neigh, the large herd of horses on the other side suddenly stopped in their tracks. The galloping of such a large number of horses actually came to an abrupt halt, without the slightest hint of disorder. Yin Yang was utterly impressed by the sight. A herd of wild horses without a master could actually move in such a disciplined manner. If he had not witnessed it with his own eyes, he would never have believed that such a thing could happen in this world. It was like a miracle, almost like a miracle. The leader of the wild horse herd was a fiery red steed. The height and length of the red steed were almost the same as the snow-white steed. At this moment, It was letting out a provocative roar. It was obvious that it wanted to settle the matter regarding the ownership of the hot spring lake and use strength to determine the victor. Yun Yang understood the situation the moment he saw it. It was the middle of winter. The weather was freezing, and the snow was falling. In order to eat freshwater grass, the wild horses could only live near the hot spring lake. However, there was only one hot spring lake, and the two horse herds were fighting over the ownership of the hot spring lake. To Yun Yang, this was completely unnecessary. The surface area of the hot spring lake was rather large. Due to the geothermal heat, the surrounding land of the hot spring lake was also covered with unusually dense grass. It was more than enough for the two horse herds to survive. There was no need to worry about the lack of resources or the worry of starvation. There was no need to fight at all. They could eat their fill in peace. However, this was Yun Yang's idea. The two horse herds did not share the same thought, so they could only monopolize it. This was especially true for the two horse kings. They didn't think so. As the saying goes, a mountain cannot contain two tigers. In a herd of horses, only one horse king was needed, or rather, only one horse king could exist in a herd of horses. In fact, if there was only one horse king and two horse herds, they would have merged into one long ago. However, fate made fools of man and creation was mysterious. This place had given birth to two equally matched horse kings, who were equally matched in all aspects. Then, the king of these two horses had to fight it out to determine who would be the sole king of horses. The horse herds on both sides were retreating. There was a large space in the middle, although the red and white horses did not move and only stood opposite each other from afar. Staring at each other, they were slowly pulling apart from the horse herds on both sides. Yun Yang snuck to a spot not far from the hot spring lake. In the Tianxian continent, there was no man who did not like fine horses, and Yun Yang was no exception. Before mastering the cloud manifestation, Yun Yang had used horses as a means of transportation, especially the red and white horses here. Yun Yang had fallen in love with them the moment he laid eyes on them. When he raised his eyes again, he heard two low roars from a relatively close distance. The moment he saw the overlord of the two horses, he couldn't help but immediately widen his eyes. The two horses that were originally separated by thousands of feet suddenly became like two bolts of lightning, and with an astonishing speed, as if they had traversed through space, they fiercely fought each other. Kicking, biting, ramming. No, every method of attack that a horse could use was completely displayed in this battle, and it was truly unscrupulous in its use. However, what truly shocked Yun Yang was the fact that they were so far apart from each other. How could they have suddenly become entangled in a fight? Even the so-called white steed fleeting time could not be as fast as this. Unless these two horses could fly, Yun Yang asked himself. Even when his cultivation base was at its pinnacle, it was impossible for him to cover such a long distance in a single leap. The two horses in front of him, on the other hand, had crossed the distance effortlessly, as if it was nothing at all. After another short moment, the battle between the two horses grew more and more intense, and it gradually transformed into two illusory phantoms that fought from the south to the north and from the east to the west. Occasionally, they would intersect with each other like a ball of red and white flames that were extremely gorgeous, dazzling, and moving. Even when Yun Yang tried his best, he still could not tell which side had gained the upper hand and was at an advantage. On both sides, millions of horses galloped on the spot, neighing at the sky. For a moment, the wind and clouds surged, deafening to the ears. It was obvious that both horse herds were cheering for their kings. The two horse kings were even more spirited when they heard the horses' cheers. As they neighed, they launched their attacks even faster, attacking and dodging like lightning. Four hoofs kicked each other, their movements so nimble that Yun Yang was dumbfounded. These are two horses? Were these still two horses? This was a duel between two experts of the martial arts world. Each attack, retreat, and retreat were extremely methodical. They were not simple attacks of wild beasts. Yun Yang had sneaked into the battlefield cautiously at first, but he realized that it was not that the horses did not see Yun Yang, a stranger, but that they did not care and did not care. Even when Yun Yang passed through the herd of horses, none of them reacted. There was only one mare who seemed to find Yun Yang's squeezing annoying, and nudged him aside with its large buttocks. Her meaning was obvious. Scram, don't bother me. Can't you see that your mother here is looking at my idol? Yun Yang was speechless. He was truly surprised by these horses' carelessness. In the end, Yun Yang stood there openly, watching the battle of the century between the two horse kings with his arms crossed. However, looking at the current situation, these two fellows seemed to be unusually energetic. Even if they fought for another day, there might not be a clear winner. Did he have to wait here for a day? Moreover, if they were really done fighting with their speed, it would be impossible for him to catch them. It would be a silly joke, Yin Yang pondered, feeling frustrated. If he still had the chi of vitality that he could use anytime, he would not have to go through so much trouble. The chi of vitality that was so alluring to all life in this world could allow Yin Yang to subdue them effortlessly. But he did not have it now. Come to think of it, if the chi of vitality reappeared, it would mean that Emmy would reappear. His manifestation powers would most likely be restored as well. It seemed like he would not need to look for another form of transportation. Yun Yang, who was unable to do so, rummaged through his spatial ring, hoping to find something that could attract the attention of the two horse kings. However, as he rummaged through, he only found some healing medicine and a few stalks of heaven and earth treasures. The horses did not seem to be very interested in these. Just as Yun Yang was feeling frustrated and was about to retreat, intending to find a decent horse to use as a form of transportation, he suddenly remembered something. When he was saved by the old doctor and was surrounded by the villagers of Huangshan Pass village, he heard them say something very strange. Under the beach where he had been lying, there were a large number of fishes, regardless of the direction of the current, staying at the place where he was lying. Even when they were caught, they refused to give up, as if they were fighting for some treasure. Yun Yang connected the dots at once, recalling the treasures of heaven and earth that he had eaten. He thought to himself, could it be that my flesh and blood have a special attraction to animals? However, horses did not like to eat flesh and blood. Could the attraction of his flesh and blood reach the level of a cross-species habit? Yun Yang pondered for a moment before retrieving a knife from his spatial ring and began to mow the grass. A few horses snorted and walked over in annoyance, shoving Yun Yang aside with their butts as well. Why is this person so annoying? It's fine if he stands here, but he actually wants to mow our grass. Does he think we don't know that humans can't eat grass? What a waste of good stuff. Yun Yang scratched his head and ignored them, moving to another spot to continue his mow. The horses ignored him this time, as if they did not see him. This person was too thick-skinned. It was useless whether he was chased away or not. Let him be. We have a lot of grass anyway. Even if you cut with your life on the line, how much can you mow alone? Yun Yang cut a huge bundle of grass in one go and carried it forward, all the way to the center of the battlefield. Then unexpectedly he sat down. The two horse kings glanced at him arrogantly. He's just a human shrimp. Ignore him. Let's do our job. This was the right thing to do. With another long hiss, they fought together again, fighting in one place. Seeing the two horse kings' disdain towards him, Yun Yang gritted his teeth and stabbed himself in the arm. Fresh blood dripped out at once. Yun Yang followed their advice and sprinkled it evenly on the grass. If the horses don't come, I'll come. The horses will. Since you don't eat meat, I'll mix my blood into your food. Let's see if you guys are tempted or not. I wonder if it will work. If it did not work, Yun Yang did not plan to waste any more time. He would just pick another horse and ride it. Although he could not tame the horse kings with his current cultivation base, it would not be a problem for him to tame ordinary horses. It was only to confirm if the method was effective. Yun Yang, who had just recovered from his injury, did not want to waste too much blood. He had only drained half a bowl of blood and sprinkled it on the bundle of grass in front of him before quickly bandaging the wound. His body was too weak now. He was already feeling dizzy from letting out such a small amount of blood. If he were to let out more, he might actually pass out. The two horse kings were still engaged in their battle, not even sparing a glance in his direction. From east to west, from south to north, they crisscrossed, coming and going like lightning. As the two horses fought, the Red Horse King seemed to have gained the upper hand. On the other hand, the White Horse King seemed to be exhausted and gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Coincidentally, a red silhouette flitted past Yun Yang and charged forward like a bolt of lightning, ready to follow up on his victory and take down his opponent in one fell swoop. The White Horse King let out a long neigh filled with unwillingness. Its neigh was filled with a solemn and stirring emotion. It seemed to have a premonition that it would definitely lose if the battle went on, and lose its position as the Horse King. Seeing the red horse charging towards it, the White Horse King did not show any signs of weakness. It assumed a stance, ready to face the attack head-on. From Yun Yang's point of view, if the collision were to happen, it would be a lose-lose situation. It was more likely that the white horse would die while the red horse would be gravely injured. No one would be able to emerge victorious, and neither side would be able to do well. However, the White Horse King stared in bewilderment. The Red Horse King suddenly turned from its gallop, drawing an arc in the air as it dashed back. What was it trying to do? Was there some other sinister plot? The White Horse King looked over in bewilderment, watching as the Red Horse King sprinted towards the human, who was squatting on the ground. Its front hooves kicked lightly a few times before it lowered its head and snorted. The White Horse King's eyes widened. What was going on? Our horses only make such noises when they're comfortable and yearning for something. You're young and naive, Xiao Hong. But you shouldn't be doing this to a human, should you? What are you yearning for? What are you comfortable about? Have you seen the world? Where's your Horse King demeanor? Yun Yang lifted his head and saw a large red horse head in front of him. Its nose twitched, its eyes filled with yearning as it stared fixedly at the bundle of grass beside his hand. More accurately, it was staring at the grass that was bathed in his blood. There was hope. Yun Yang put on a kind expression and said in a gentle voice, "Do you want to eat it?" The red horse looked at him warily and hopped 2 steps back. Its eyes were wide open as it stared at Yun Yang cautiously. Yun Yang pushed the tender grass in his hand forward and said, "Do you want to eat it? Do you want to eat it or not?" The red horse paced back and forth restlessly. It shook its head and looked into the distance. Then, it turned its head back and focused all of its attention on the green grass in front of it. Its throat was growling, and saliva was dripping from the corner of its mouth. "I think you just don't want to eat it." Yun Yang sighed and picked up a straw rope that he had made to kill time earlier. He collected the huge bundle of grass on the ground and tied it together with the rope. Then, he slung it on his back and turned to leave. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The red horse followed behind him, its eyes still staring longingly at the grass on its back. It snorted impatiently, and then snorted again. It obviously wanted to extend its mouth to eat it, but it instinctively felt the danger. However, it did not want to give up. It was the most tempting impulse it had ever felt in its life. Due to the situation, the red horse could only follow step by step. Yun Yang seemed to feel the danger of carrying the grass on his back, so he hugged it in his arms and continued to move forward. His speed was even increasing. The red horse panicked. It dared not eat it, but smelling it was good enough. "Why did you put it in front of you? Why are you so stingy?" It took another 2 steps forward and nudged Yun Yang's back with its head. Yun Yang turned back to look. The red horse retreated 30 to 40 feet as if it had been frightened, looking at him warily. Yun Yang waved his hand and said, "No need to send me off. I'm leaving now. I'm afraid we won't see each other again." Before his words echoed in the air, he turned to leave again. The red horse gave chase again. He turned his head again. He retreated again. He turned back, and the red horse gave chase again. Just like that, a grand show of intrigue began. While the show was going on, the White Horse King in the middle of the battlefield saw that its opponent had actually ignored it and was wholeheartedly following behind the human. It had no idea what the White Horse King was doing, and for a moment it was at a loss. It was speechless. What was it trying to do? What was it doing? Why was it acting so strangely? Humans might not understand what the red horse was trying to do, but the white horse was able to understand it at first glance. It was obviously trying to curry favor, It was even trying to flatter. But what was going on? Why did it start sucking up to someone else when it was fighting me? Did it still have the integrity of a horse king? Did it have the dignity and pride of a strong man? I'm actually standing side by side with this horse. I'm so embarrassed. I'm still F** king bruised, and it hurts so much. How come his opponent was gone just like that? It went to flatter and fawn. You F** king broke the rules. Why didn't you offer yourself and let that person ride you? If you let that person ride you, then this daddy will truly be convinced by you. Then you'll be in heaven. The white horse, who was cursing in its heart, watched as its opponent followed that strange human for hundreds of feet. It could not help but let out a long neigh, venting its deep dissatisfaction. That person did have some grass in his hands, but didn't we eat grass every day? Was there something special about that person's grass? Haven't you ever eaten grass in your 8 lives? Do you lack grass that much? Can't you do without it? Can't you even hold on for a while with less grass? It actually followed him just like that. You really made us lose our horses. You're lowering our majesty. The red horse was stunned. It turned its head and let out a long neigh, its voice full of disdain. What the F** ck do you know? Is that normal grass? How could it be normal grass? Do you think I'm a stupid horse that hasn't seen the world? No matter what, my brother is the king of horses of this generation. I don't lack grass. It's just that I haven't tasted this top-grade grass before. Do you think that top-grade grass is so easy to see, smell, and touch? I really F** king want to eat it. Yun Yang had turned back several times to entice and tease the stallion. Slowly, the red stallion could no longer hold it in. It began to move forward on its own accord, snuggling behind Yun Yang's buttocks. The horse's mouth bit Yun Yang's shirt, and its tail flicked loudly. It was like a little girl walking while holding an adult's sleeve. She wanted something good, but was too embarrassed to ask for it. She could only follow impatiently, pouting anxiously, hoping that the adult would be more perceptive and give the good stuff away. But why was this person in front of him so blind? It was such a big bundle of grass. Would it kill him to give him a little? However, as Yun Yang turned back and tried to touch it with his hand, the red horse gradually stopped rejecting him, getting used to it. He could touch it. He wouldn't really mind losing a piece of horse meat. But now that he had touched it, he was giving it to him. Yun Yang had gone from a light touch at the beginning to touching it up, down, left, and right. The more he touched, the more satisfied he became. His eyes were already squinting into slits. This red horse was a horse that had just reached adulthood. It looked to be 4 or 5 years old at most. If it were a human, it would be a 17 or 18-year-old youth. Although this was the peak period of a horse's life, the quality of this red horse had reached a level that would make people's jaws drop. Furthermore, Yun Yang could feel an inexplicable surge of energy coursing through the horse's body. This energy was not something that a horse should possess. Yun Yang guessed that this horse and the white horse must have eaten something special, causing their bodies to mutate to a certain extent. Otherwise, it was impossible for a horse's innate ability to be so strong. Seeing that his plan was working, Yun Yang finally pulled a few strands of grass from the big bundle and placed them beside the horse's mouth like he was giving alms. Yun Yang was sure that after eating the grass that had been bathed in his blood, the red horse would no longer be able to resist the temptation to follow him. The red horse did not care about anything else. Its eyes shone as it opened its mouth and rolled its tongue, chewing the few strands of grass in front of it. Once it entered its mouth, its eyes shone with excitement. As it ate, its eyes stared at Yun Yang fawningly. Yes, it was staring at the big bundle of grass greedily. Yun Yang held the horse's back and patted it lightly. It was obvious that he wanted more grass. Sure, but you have to use yourself in exchange. Let your father ride you, and you'll get the grass. The red horse seemed to understand his intention immediately, and took a few steps back. Its gaze turned to Yun Yang warily, dissatisfaction evident in its gaze. I treat you as a friend, and I want your grass. You actually want to ride me? How could there be such a thing in this world? Chapter 472. Yun Yang's reaction to the red horse was within his expectations, so he did not mind it at all. He continued walking forward, as if he did not care at all. The red stallion hesitated for a moment as it watched the person walk further and further away, but it could not resist the temptation of delicacies. It stalked after Yin Yang once more and repeated what it had done before, using its head to nudge Yin Yang's hand and back, its intention to beg for grass. Yin Yang flung his arm away and avoided it. He hugged a big bundle of grass and walked forward angrily, not letting the stallion touch it anymore. The horse glared innocently and followed him with its head lowered. It then went forward to touch it again but was not allowed to. Touch again, touch again, touch. The red stallion shook its head happily, flicking its tail and sticking out its tongue to curl the grass. This time, Yin Yang took out another 2 to 3 stalks of grass and passed them over. The red stallion ate them happily. Not only was it not satiated, but its desire grew even stronger. It wanted nothing more than to chew the entire bundle of grass in Yin Yang's embrace. Yin Yang placed his hand on the horse's back once more. The horse immediately retreated again, but it was still very hesitant. After 3 consecutive times, Yin Yang seemed to be completely infuriated. He quickened his pace and walked forward. No matter how the horse fawned, or acted coquettishly, he did not touch it anymore. He would not let the grass eat it. He had already walked a distance of about 10,000 feet. The white stallion and the horses on both sides were dumbfounded and speechless. It was obvious that they did not know what was going on. After a while, the red stallion could no longer hold it in. It suddenly galloped to Yin Yang, its head bobbing up and down before it snuggled into Yin Yang's embrace, and opened its mouth to eat the grass. You can't coax it, so you snatch it? Are you robbing a horse? Why don't you go to heaven if you're so capable? Yin Yang was furious. With a flick of his wrist, the bundle of grass disappeared in an instant. The red stallion was stunned. Where's my grass? Where's my delicacy? Where did it go? Could this person know magic? How could he just disappear into thin air? A horse was a horse after all. It did not know that a spatial ring was a must-have item for traveling, but it knew that it was Yin Yang's doing. It paced around anxiously, its eyes eager to please. Yin Yang snorted and ignored it, walking forward as if he did not see a horse like this in front of him. When the horse approached him again, he immediately dodged and took a detour. You want grass, but you dare not let me ride you. I don't want you anymore, okay? Yin Yang's determination terrified the red stallion. This human is actually ignoring me. What should they do? If I eat more of that grass, it will be even more beneficial to me, and I can become even more outstanding. As long as I eat all of them, I feel that my bloodline can be purified to an unprecedented level. Yin Yang continued to walk forward. The red stallion was obviously anxious, hopping in front of him and nudging him backward with its head. Yin Yang dodged again and again, but the horse stopped him again and again. They fell into a strange stalemate. After a while, Yin Yang, who saw that the horse was really hungry, finally stopped. The red horse stood in front of him in a submissive manner. Humph! Yin Yang suddenly snorted coldly and was about to walk over from the side. The red stallion panicked. It suddenly neighed and plopped onto the ground. With a roll, its white belly was exposed. Its 4 hooves were half curled towards the sky, its eyes staring at a certain unscrupulous human. Yin Yang was amused and annoyed at the same time. He scolded. If you can't steal it, then you snatch it. If you can't snatch it, then you flatter it. Aren't you the king of horses? Where's your style? Where's your pride? Where's the lower limit of your integrity? I've really broadened my horizons today. Of course, the horse did not understand what he was saying, only looking at him with its head tilted. Yin Yang went around it and continued to walk forward. Seeing that someone was still walking, the horse stood up and followed behind him, pestering him shamelessly. I won't give up if I can't eat the grass. Yin Yang sighed and took out a small handful of grass that seemed to materialize out of thin air. The horse was overjoyed, rushing forward to eat it from Yin Yang's palm. Its wet tongue even licked Yin Yang's palm in a fawning manner. Yin Yang took out another handful. The horse's eyes shone as it came forward again. Yin Yang did not give it the grass directly. Instead, he pressed his palm against the horse's back once more, pushing it down. The red stallion did not retreat this time, but it stood stiffly for a long time. as if thinking whether it should yield or not. It knew very well that as long as it allowed this human to ride its body, it would no longer be free. However, if it did not allow this person to ride it, it would never be able to eat the grass. If it wanted grass, it would have to be ridden. The red stallion whimpered, looking at Yin Yang with teary eyes. It was obvious that it did not want to give up its freedom. However, it did not want to give up the delicious grass either. Yin Yang could feel the struggle clearly. After all, a certain someone was not that crazy. His heart softened as he said, all right. You'll only help me for a while, then I'll let you go. What do you say?" The red stallion tilted its head and looked at him innocently. Yin Yang said seriously, "I'm a gentleman. I've never told lies, nor will I go back on my word." The horse looked at him with its head tilted, its gaze softening slowly. It whimpered and flicked its tail, finally lowering itself slowly. Yin Yang was overjoyed as he hopped up. This was the first time the red horse had been ridden by someone. It shook its body a little unnaturally, and then it had a new feeling. This state was not a big deal. This guy did not weigh much, and it was not a big deal without him. It seemed to have gotten used to it after running a few steps with Yin Yang on its back. It rubbed its head against Yin Yang's leg and opened its mouth, its eyes filled with desire. All right, I'll give it to you. I'll give it all to you." Yin Yang chortled and grabbed a bunch of them, sending them to the red stallion's mouth. The red stallion was overjoyed at once, munching and chewing, its eyes filled with contentment. Under Yin Yang's command, the red stallion galloped out of the mountain, ignoring the calls of the millions of horses behind it. At this moment, the sound of hooves rang out from behind. A bolt of white lightning leaped overtaking Yin Yang and the red stallion to block their path. It was the king of the white horse. Only another king of horses, would have the courage, the speed, and the qualification to stop the red stallion. The white horse king blocked the path with an anxious look in its eyes. It looked at the little red horse and snorted as it neighed loudly. The red horse listened attentively to the white horse's neighing. When the white horse's neighing stopped, the red horse raised its head to the sky and let out a long neigh. It slowly walked over and used its nose to touch the white horse's nose, as if bidding farewell. It then took 2 steps back. After a moment of silence, all 4 of its hooves moved without warning, like a red cloud carrying Yin Yang as it galloped away at lightning speed. This time, the white stallion did not give chase. It stood alone on the spot, watching the red silhouette leave, its eyes filled with confusion. Why had its old rival given up on the throne of kings so easily? Had it left with someone else just like that? As the king of horses, the most honorable horse in the world, it was only a handful of grass. And it had already been seduced? Did it still have any morals? Did it have any bottom line? Was it so willing to be ridden by someone else? The millions of horses behind it neighed in unison, as if urging their king to return or sending him off. However, the red stallion had already galloped far away without turning back. Yin Yang rode on the horse's back. It was only a simple run-in, but the man and the horse had achieved a seamless cooperation. The red stallion's ability to comprehend was astonishing. It could even be considered extremely intelligent. During the run-in, Yin Yang had only hinted a few times, and the horse was already running properly. The red stallion shot into the distance like an arrow. It was galloping at such a high speed, but Yin Yang did not feel much of a jolt as he rode on the horse's back. The horse harness that the villagers had prepared for him was completely useless. Of course, Yin Yang was unwilling to use reins, saddles, and other tools to restrain this highly intelligent steed. He might as well just leave it naked. After all, with his riding skills, there was not much of a difference between having a saddle or not. Yin Yang had purposely slowed down his speed until noon. When he stopped to rest, his broken legs and bones could no longer stand the jolts. He realized that the red stallion had already run more than 500 miles. Yin Yang was surprised. Ever since he had gotten the red pony, he had only been running for 4 hours. How could it have already run such a long distance? According to common sense, a horse that could travel 1,000 miles in a day could already be said to be a top-notch treasure horse in the world. Even 1,000 miles in a day was just a synonym for a treasure horse. Very few horses could truly do this, and even if they could, it was not normal. However, the little red horse under him clearly had a limit that was far beyond this. If it was allowed to run as much as it wanted, in just a day, it would not be difficult to run a distance of 3,000 miles. And even, it could run even further. In the beginning, Yun-yang would grab a few stalks of grass to feed the horse, after running a certain distance. After 7 to 8 times, the red stallion stopped eating when he took out the grass again. But it moved faster and faster. It was still energetic, and did not show any signs of fatigue. Looks like the grass bathed in my blood has an extraordinary effect. This horse can only eat a certain amount a day. The amount it has eaten so far should be enough for it to digest and absorb for some time. Yin-yang heaved a sigh of relief. Not only is this horse highly perceptive and intelligent, it has a sense of propriety, and is sensible. The red stallion snorted. It's not that I don't want to eat, but it's useless to eat too much. There's only so much of it. That's my food. I have to eat it sparingly and eat it slowly. Besides, there's no other horse to eat it other than me. It's a good choice to keep some stock for myself, so there's always a surprise. Chapter 473. The red stallion looked at him with sparkling eyes, and nodded lightly in agreement. Now that the little red stallion was fully impressed by Yun-yang's grass attack, it could hardly object to Yun-yang's request. However, if the little red stallion knew about Yun-yang's glorious history of naming and his past achievements, it would rather jump off a cliff than allow its unscrupulous master to name it. It was a pity that it did not know now. When it did, it would be too late. It would be over for it if it was too late. You're all red. Shall we call you Big Red? Yin-yang asked. The red stallion stared at Yin-yang in a daze, its tail swaying uncontrollably. Big Red? What kind of lousy name was that? Could it be any more vulgar than that? You don't like Big Red? You're still young. It's not appropriate to call you Big Red. How about Little Red? Yin-yang asked tentatively. Hoo-hoo. The red stallion was still swinging its tail in displeasure. What Big Red or Little Red? This horse king is a male. Didn't you see how long it was when I turned over? Why can't you even come up with a name? Don't you know how to be majestic? How preposterous. Still not satisfied? Yin-yang frowned. I really think that Little Red is a good name. It suits you very well. If you're really not satisfied, we can change it. But this is the last one. This name is final. You're not allowed to say it again. The stallion looked at Yin-yang expectantly, hoping that its new master would give it a good name, like Southern Batian, Warhorse King, Pegasus, Dragon Horse, Crimson King, and so on. Even if he was called Little Red Dragon or Little Red Tiger, it would still be good. I've decided to call you Ready from now on, Yin-yang said excitedly. Ready, isn't this an awesome name? When others hear it, they'll know how red you are. Red all over red name, and twice as red. There's no other name that suits you better. The red stallion was foaming at the mouth, its heart shut tight. Was there a need for others to hear it? Just look at it, all right? You thought about it for so long, and came up with such a bullsh *T name? Ready is not as good as Big Red or Little Red. How is this double red? Can you be a little more despicable? Hong hong. The red stallion no longer had the energy to complain about this new name. It snorted in protest, spraying saliva all over Yin-yang's face. How could it know that Yin-yang's naming of the past was already infuriating? Its red name was merely a reflection of its appearance, like Bye-bye and GG, which had long been seen. Fate, this was fate. There was a price to pay for a moment of pleasure, a heavy and painful price to pay. Horse King Hong Hong was born. Hong Hong, look at how excited you are. You must really like the name I gave you, right? Yin-yang was shameless as he said happily. There's a shop in front. Let's go there and have some food and rest. You don't know how tired I am from riding you. My back and legs are aching. I'm not feeling well now and can't go on for long. When I'm fully recovered, it'll be the time for you to taste your master's majesty. Are you looking forward to it? Red Horse, Redbird wanted to cry, but no tears came out. When did you see that I was satisfied with this name? I'm a horse, you're a human. Our communication is effective, all right? Do you know whether I'm satisfied or not? You've raped a horse like this. This Hong Hong will definitely take revenge. However, the horse's eyes widened immediately. What did its master eat? Why did it smell so good? What food could smell so good? Yun Yang sat down at a small tavern by the roadside and casually ordered wine and food while he consumed various healing medicines and rubbed his injured thigh. The faint pain told him that he had to be careful with his injury. If he continued to gallop like this, his newly healed leg might be crippled again before he could even reach the battlefield. As the only customer of this roadside tavern, Yun Yang's food and wine were served quickly. Not only were 3 stir-fried dishes served piping hot, there was also a plate of braised meat. Yun Yang chewed twice. This bacon was not beef, but a low-level mystical beast's meat. He was the best in the world at distinguishing between livestock meat and mystical beast meat. After all, he had been a glutton for a long time. How could he not know this? He poured himself a bowl of wine and was about to drink it and eat heartily when his vision suddenly darkened. Hong Hong, what are you doing? Yun Yang was genuinely shocked by the current situation. Hong Hong's huge horse head came over at an inopportune time, staring at the wine in his bowl greedily and snorting. I want a drink. Although Hong Hong did not know how to speak the human language, the meaning of these 3 words was clearly expressed. Hong Hong was actually a horse that wanted to drink wine? Yun Yang's mind froze. When he recovered, he saw that the bowl in front of him was already empty. Hong Hong snorted a few times in excitement. If Hong Hong was not a red horse, its flushed face would have been frozen in front of Yun Yang's eyes. You really drank it? Yun Yang was speechless again. However, Hong Hong still looked as if it wanted more if it had not drunk enough. It dawdled and flicked its tail at Yun Yang, urging him to drink more. Waiter, get me another bowl. No matter how speechless Yun Yang was, he could not really stay silent. At least, this bowl could not be used. With a roll of Hong Hong's fat tongue, it took care of both the inside and outside of the bowl. No matter how much Yun Yang liked Hong Hong, it was not to the point where they could share a bowl. While waiting for the other bowl to arrive, Yun Yang lifted the wine pot and poured ready another bowl of wine, thinking to himself, I can't guarantee a sufficient supply of fresh blood and grass, but I can't limit the wine. However, this fellow won't be drunk, will he? However, Hong Hong downed 3 consecutive bowls without batting an eyelid. It was obvious that it had a lot of tolerance. It was the god of wine among horses. Yun Yang was amazed. During the meal, Yun Yang circulated his mystical qi a few times. Other than recovering his stamina, he also allowed the medicine he had just consumed to swiftly heal his meridians, strengthening his broken bones that had grown back together. It was best to use mystical qi to activate the medicinal effect. After a round of recuperation, he felt much more relaxed. However, Yun Yang still recognized the current situation. He could not run like this anymore. His body could not handle it. Yun Yang sighed inwardly, lamenting the fact that his body did not live up to his expectations. Using Hong Hong as a means of transportation, there was almost no jolt on Hong Hong's back. However, it was a long journey after all, and it was still a great damage to his body that had yet to recover. One's life experience had to be tempered through the years. It was not something that could be replaced by one's cultivation base, or the level of one's cultivation base. I really need to slow down a little. Yun Yang pressed on his injured leg. No matter how anxious I am, I can't let myself go to the battlefield half crippled. I'll only be a burden, and won't be of any help at all. Now that I have Hong Hong as a means of transportation, I'll definitely reach the eastern border earlier than expected. There's no need to force myself, or else I'll really be more eager than I am. It was a pity that the ideal was beautiful, but the reality was harsh. Things never went according to one's wishes. After resuming their journey, Yun Yang was annoyed to find that this wine-loving horse had been fine when it had just finished drinking. But after a while of galloping, the alcohol in its body had been unleashed as its blood flow was unimpeded. It had actually begun to throw a drunken tantrum. The drunken horse was indeed charging forward in a frenzy. It was no longer as stable as it had been when it was moving, causing Yun Yang to feel dizzy. I won't let you drink anymore. Yun Yang swore solemnly in his heart. When it was close to evening that day, the sky was not dark yet. Yun Yang went in to find an inn to stay when he saw a town. Heal, heal, heal. Healing was the most important thing right now. There were still about 4,000 miles to go to the battlefield, and they were bound to face a great battle when they arrived. He had to be in perfect condition to deal with it. No news had come back, which was the best news. It meant that the war was still going on. It was still going on. It was good that they had not been defeated. The Fortress of Resilience. The battle here had been devastating. The sun and moon had lost their light. It was the war of the century, the scale of which was unprecedented. The war between Yutong and Dongxian was growing more intense. Not only had Dongxian sent in more troops to suppress the eastern line with the strength of the entire nation, but Yutong's reinforcements had also arrived. Other than the martial artists and ordinary citizens who came daily, Yutong's military reinforcements had arrived as well. The first to arrive was the Western Line's 150,000 troops. The Western Line's Marshal Wang Yunju did not hold back at all this time. He had sent the Western troops' most elite and most capable troops. To put it bluntly, without these 150,000 men, the Western Line was now an empty shell. Its overall combat power had been reduced by at least 60%. The Western Line's Marshal, Wang Yunju, had said it well. Lord Supreme Cloud's presence in Zilong City and suppression of the Empire of Zio has dampened the Empire's morale and will to fight. They won't be able to form a threatening attack within a short period of time. It can be said that the war that should have been dealt with by the Western Line has been fought for us by Lord Supreme Cloud. The Western Line is relaxed now, but Yutong's crisis is still there. The Eastern Line is facing a tough battle. The Empire of Dongxian, with Han Sanhe as their marshal, is leading millions of soldiers to attack the Fortress of Resilience. That's why we have to go and help. Actually, helping is only secondary. The main point is to let you brats go and see how the Eastern troop fights. Why Marshal Fu Baogua is acknowledged by Yutong's military as the top of Yutong's younger generation. However, your father has something to say first. Picking all of you out of the Western troops, 400,000 men, to go to help is not to embarrass your father. Whoever embarrasses himself there will embarrass the Western troop. King Hell. Even if you die on the battlefield, your father will forge a monument of cowardice and send it to your hometown. I'll erect it at your doorstep. I'll erect it on your ancestors' graves. Now your father departs. Go to the Eastern Line and fight that King Han Sanhe for your father. Chapter 474. The Commander-in-Chief's words were majestic and powerful and resonant. However, no one in the Western troop dared to doubt the words spoken by this man, who was widely acknowledged as the most boorish, unreasonable, adept at scolding and cursing people's ancestors. He could really do what he said. He would definitely do what he said when he said he would erect a tombstone in front of anyone's house if they were a coward. He would do exactly the same when the time came. There would be no room for negotiation. The elites of the Western Legion roared as they charged out. There was a voice in everyone's heart that answered, "We can't be cowards even if we're beaten to death." If a tombstone of shame were to be erected in front of their house, how could their families face the world in the future? Moreover, Wang Yunju's last sentence ignited the blood of all the soldiers in the Western Army. Fu Baogua is Yutong's top young general. This is publicly acknowledged. Your father is convinced. But the Eastern troop has always been called Yutong's top troop. Your father is not convinced. Remember to snatch this title back for your father when I send you over. Your father has lost once. My subordinates must not lose again. Snatch it back. We must snatch it back. 150,000 men roared in unison, causing the ground to tremble. The leader of the reinforcement troops was the vanguard of the Western Army, Sun Zihu, the most valiant general under Wang Yunju. Before leaving, Marshal Wang called Sun Zihu aside and said solemnly, "Sun Zihu, you must remember. Marshal, can you call me by my full name? You can even call me Huzi. Don't you find it awkward to call me grandson, with such a serious expression?" Sun Zihu looked at his commander with extreme displeasure. His face was full of whiskers. Scram. Scram, scram. Your father wanted to give you a few more reminders, but I'm not in the mood now. I won't say anything to you." Wang Yunju kicked his trusted subordinate away. Sun Zihu scrambled to his feet and left, following which, the army set off and left quickly. Seeing that the army was getting further and further away, Wang Yunju slapped the big tree beside him in annoyance. "I wanted to tell him to bring back as many brothers alive as possible. I was already so serious. But that bastard is so insensitive. If he really dares to kill too many of our brothers, I'll really turn his grandson into a grandson." The generals at the side rolled their eyes at him. "Insensitive? Marshal, you've been calling him grandson for 8 years. Who can understand such amorous feelings? Your solemn, formal, and serious attitude is really too formal, too serious, too serious, too serious, too serious." The reason why Sun Zihu didn't argue with you on the spot, like he usually is, probably because you're being so formal and serious. Sun Zihu is really giving you face. However, they only cursed in their hearts and didn't say it out loud. After all, everyone knew the marshal's true thoughts. When the army was far away and could no longer be seen, the vulgar and abnormally boorish Grand Marshal stood on that high spot for a long time, gazing into the distance for a long time. It was as if he could still see the long-gone figures of the reinforcements from the Western Front, but also as if he was looking forward to the safe return of his soldiers. His lonely figure, with his hands behind his back, kept gazing into the distance. He didn't move a single step until the sky turned dark. No one dared to look at the marshal's face. All the generals silently went back by themselves. That night, the Western camp was silent. It was said that the marshal was drunk, which was rare for him. He was dead drunk. Sun Zihu had been traveling at lightning speed all along the way. Especially when he left, he tried his best to control himself and not look back. He had followed the marshal for 11 years. After spending 11 years together, he knew the marshal's temperament like the back of his hand. At the last moment, how could Sun Zihu not know what the marshal wanted to say? However, he didn't let the marshal say it, because if the marshal said it, he was afraid that he would cry uncontrollably. He was a man, yet a 7-foot-tall man was crying. It was too embarrassing. However, going to the Eastern Front this time, to participate in the most tragic battle of his life. How many of his 150,000 brothers would come back alive? No one could guarantee this. Even Sun Zihu himself didn't have the confidence to come back alive. "Marshal, if I, Sun Zihu, can come back alive, I will still be your vanguard. At that time, even if you still call me grandson, damn it, can you not call me grandson anymore?" Sun Zihu wiped away the tears in his eyes and replied to himself on behalf of the marshal in his heart. "Damn it! If I don't call you grandson, how can I call you grandfather? So what if I call you grandson? I want to call you grandson for the rest of my life. Grandson. Damn it! The marshal is so rude. I can't change it in this lifetime." Sun Zihu scolded jokingly, laughing with tears in his eyes. The deputy general beside him was also a tall and strong fellow. He asked in disbelief, "General, are you crying?" Sun Zihu was enraged when he heard that. His face flushed and his hair stood on end as he roared with all his might. "Damn it! You're the one crying. You're the one who's crying. Do you have eyes for pissing? When did I cry? You bastard! Men, record this general's military order. Wang Daxiong has belittled his superior. Next month's pay will be deducted." Wang Daxiong was speechless. MMP. He was clearly crying, and yet he didn't allow anyone to say anything. Deducting pay at the drop of a hat. "Don't you know any other tricks? My pay for the past 3 years has already been confiscated by you. If it weren't for the fact that you took the money and gave your pay to the families of the martyrs, I would have already chopped you up with my sword." The army marched day and night without stopping. By the time Sun Zihu led the Western reinforcements to the Fortress of Resilience, they had arrived a day and a half ahead of schedule. All the elites of the Western Army were steaming hot in this cold weather. However, this had become the norm for the Western reinforcements. Everyone's cotton clothes had been drenched in sweat at least 30 to 40 times along the way. They had to continue wearing them even when they were drenched, drying themselves with their own body temperature. They dared not take them off no matter how uncomfortable they were. Once they were taken off to dry, the cotton clothes would immediately turn into hard metal in the cold weather. By then, they would truly have nothing to wear. However, Sun Zihu's eyes widened the moment he saw the situation in front of the Fortress of Resilience. When he rushed over, it was just when the offensive and defensive sides had just finished a battle. The ground in front of the Fortress of Resilience was dyed crimson. The Fortress of Resilience was a pass that would be reinforced by generations of defending generals, but it was already filled with signs of destruction. Everything else aside, just the marks on the tens of thousands of caddies of rocks that had been used to forge the walls sent chills down Sun Zihu's spine. What kind of attack had they endured to leave such marks? As far as the eye could see, the rock that was rumored to be indestructible was covered in cracks, and some of the outer layers of the rock had already been ripped off. Sun Zihu, who had been through hundreds of battles, knew what kind of situation this would happen. Only when the attacking soldiers had already rushed up the walls, but had yet to step in would such a situation occur. In other words, someone had already climbed up to the top of the wall in the battle, just now, grabbing onto it with both hands. He only needed to flip over, and he would be able to enter. However, he was suddenly pushed back down at that very moment. The soldier who fell from the top of the city wall, following the strongest survival instinct of human nature, made him grab randomly in that instant, hoping to grab anything that could support him and stabilize his body. Only in that kind of situation would he be able to dig out that kind of stone fragment from the outside of the city wall. The entire outer wall of the Fortress of Resilience was in such a state. How many times of intense seesaw attacks and defenses had they gone through to achieve such a state? The more he thought about it, the more intimidated he became. It was truly frightening and soul-stirring. At that moment, Dongshuan's troops outside the fortress were cleaning up the corpses of their fallen soldiers. Upon closer inspection, Sun Zihu felt a chill run down his spine, his muscles tightening. Looking from afar, many of Dongshuan's soldiers' corpses could no longer be carried on stretchers. There were simply too many dead. There were simply not enough stretchers to carry them. Dongshuan's troops had used carriages to load the carriages, laying down long and wide wooden planks. The corpses of the fallen soldiers were tossed onto the carriages like broken sacks. A wooden carriage could probably hold dozens of corpses. If they were piled higher, there would be a few more. This was only the surface of the corpses strewn all over the ground. After moving one corpse, there were still many more below. Another layer was moved, and another layer was moved. It was only when the ground was dyed red that the process of cleaning up the corpses came to an end. In spite of this, the blood that flowed on the ground was even more ghastly. The elites of the Western troops sucked in a cold breath, their hearts chilled. Tragic. Chapter 475. Such a brutal battle had never happened in the Western troops' many years of war. After all, the enemies they faced were different. Dongxian and Ziyou's armies were fundamentally different. The empire of Ziyou's army's individual combat ability was second to none in this world. But they had never gained the upper hand against Yutong's army, that excelled in teamwork. Yutong's Western troop, who had always gained the upper hand against Ziyou's army, had always felt that their combat power was the best in Yutong. Previously, Marshal Wang of the Western troop had given the order for the Western reinforcements to snatch Yutong's top troop. But now, witnessing the Eastern battle with their own eyes, the Western elites felt their hearts skip a beat. Tens of thousands of corpses had been lost in a single battle. Sun Zihu entered the Fortress of Resilience in a daze, but he was immediately warmly welcomed by the defending generals. Fu Baogua had even come out personally to receive him and treat him with the highest of honors. Holding Sun Zihu's hand, Fu Baogua's eyes were brimming with tears. The Fortress of Resilience was in dire need of reinforcements right now. Perhaps it should be said that the Fortress of Resilience had always needed reinforcements, but the need for reinforcements was already pressing. Without reinforcements, the Fortress of Resilience could no longer be defended. It was in a precarious situation, and could easily be destroyed. Faced with Han Sanha's ferocious attack, Fu Baogua's 400,000 men were decreasing at a speed that pained him to the core. There were less than 250,000 men who could fight now. These 250,000 men included the steel cavalry, who could not participate in the defense of the fortress, and the 30,000 men that belonged to Fu Baoguo's secret troop. In other words, there were only 80,000 men left to participate in the daily defense of the fortress. Almost every single one of these 80,000 people was exhausted. They were barely holding on and could collapse at any moment. Fu Baoguo's face was pale, his eyes sunken, and he was almost out of shape. He, who had always paid attention to his appearance, now looked like a middle-aged uncle with stubble all over his face. In spite of this, the concealed killing intent still proved that Fu Baoguo was still holding on, still abiding by the promise he had made to Yun Yang that day. Marshal Fu, you've worked hard. Sun Zihu has led 150,000 brothers from the Western Army to participate in the battle. The reinforcements from the Western Front will all listen to Marshal Fu's commands. Orders will be strictly executed, and there will be no objections. To be able to become an elite in the army, they were basically veterans. With just a glance at the battlefield, Sun Zihu and the 150,000 Western troops had a good understanding of the current situation. They were even more impressed by the Eastern troops. The top troop of Yutong lived up to its reputation. Marshal, your wish of us taking back Yutong's top troop is really slim. At least, we don't have much confidence in it. Battles were always two-sided. To be able to beat the enemy so miserably, the price they had to pay couldn't be any better. Brothers, you've worked hard. Fu Baoguo smiled warmly and happily. Brothers, it's been a long and arduous journey. Just looking at your attire is enough to tell you that. I'll have a good meal tonight, and then I'll sleep. There's no need to worry about the war. Let's talk about it after we recover. We'll need to rely on you guys in the future, but not now. Yes. Sun Zihu was also a man who knew how to fight. Naturally, he knew that Fu Baoguo's words were sincere, and that he was truly thinking for the Western troop. He had led 150,000 brothers to rush all the way. Although they had arrived a day and a half earlier, and their morale was high, their stamina was already at its limit. Everyone was exhausted. If they were to join the battle now, they would only be slaughtered. They weren't here to help, but to throw their lives away. A night of rest was indeed necessary. It was absolutely necessary. The reinforcements who had traveled such a long way, in addition to familiarizing themselves with the war, the terrain, and the situation, would need at least 2 days of rest before they could fully recover and assimilate. However, both Sun Zihu and Fu Baoguo knew that Han Sanhe would never give them this buffer time. Indeed, on the same night that the reinforcements arrived, Dongshuan's army launched another attack on the Fortress of Resilience under Han Sanhe's command. It was an unprecedentedly powerful attack. The 300,000 soldiers of Dongxian were divided into 6 waves by Han Sanhe, who attacked relentlessly without any break in between. The sounds of battle shook the heavens. Fu Baoguo tried his best to divide the defending troops into 3 waves, taking turns to go forward. Many of the soldiers were truly exhausted. They carried the rocks and walked, but when they suddenly fell to the ground, they did not faint from exhaustion. They died from exhaustion. Fu Baoguo's expression was steely, his heart was steely as well. He knew that he had to get through this. If he could not, the Fortress of Resilience would fall without a doubt. On the other hand, with the aid of the Western reinforcements, he could continue fighting Han Sanhe. Marshal, deploy the steel cavalry and the serving troop to help defend the fort. Many of the steel cavalry generals and Fu Baoguo's secret troop came forward to plead, tears streaming down their faces. We can't go on like this. The brothers who defend the fort are dying of exhaustion. Fu Baoguo's expression was like a rock. No, it's your time to rest now. Go back to sleep. We can still hold on here. We don't need your help. The faces of the generals of the 2 elite troops were practically drenched in tears. The brothers can't take it anymore. They're watching their comrades die in battle, die from exhaustion, and they can't hold on any longer. But we're eating and sleeping every day, doing nothing. The brothers are going crazy. Fu Baoguo said coldly. Going crazy? No, we're not really crazy. Then you must continue to hold on. The day will come when it's your turn. Don't blame me for not reminding you when you're unlucky if you can't sleep or rest now. Now I order you to scram. Even if you're really crazy, there's still a place for you to go crazy. Scram. The generals left with their heads hung low. It was not that Fu Baoguo was steel-hearted and did not want to deploy the steel cavalry and the secret troop to defend the fort. But he could not. The fortress of resilience had to be defended. However, Fu Baoguo already had a plan in mind against Han Sanhe's attack. The fortress of resilience might not be able to hold on for much longer. Even if they managed to get through this, the amount of time they could hold on would still be limited with the help of the Western reinforcements. Once the fortress of resilience was breached, the 30,000 secret troop and 150,000 steel cavalry would be the foundation for Fu Baoguo to build another fortress of resilience. If they were to be expended defending the fort now, it would be the greatest waste. The greatest strength that a cavalry could unleash would always be on horseback. It was never defending the fort. Sun Zihu led his army and settled down in the empty barracks in the fort. These barracks were initially filled with men, but now they were empty, with barely a soul to be seen. Looking at the clean and tidy military camp that was empty, the small tables and chairs in the tents, as well as the handwriting left behind by the officers and soldiers, the 150,000 elite soldiers of the Western Army cried like children. On the 3rd day of the 12th lunar month, arrive at the Fortress of Resilience. Fight for the country. 10 comrades will discuss their funeral arrangements. Their wills and the soldiers' provisions will be settled today. However, the brothers don't think that they'll die, so we laughed all night. On the 6th of the 12th month, the battle started today. We didn't go out to battle. In the afternoon, we saw many of our comrades' corpses being carried back and burned. The brothers were silent. The entire barracks so quiet you could hear a pin drop. On the 7th of the 12th month, we went out to battle. 3 of our brothers died in battle. When we returned to this tent, there were only 7 of us left. We cried our hearts out. On the 9th of the 12th month we fought. 2 of our brothers died in battle. The remaining 5 cried their hearts out again, mourning our fallen brothers. On the 11th of the 12th month, only Sun Dabiao and I came back. This time there were no more tears. It wasn't that we wanted to cry but had no tears. Both of us placed our brothers' memorial tablets properly and bought wine with silver coins, getting drunk all night. We told our brothers not to go too far and to wait for us. We'll be back with the troops soon. On the 13th of the 12th month, Sun Dabiao died in battle. There was a small notebook in Sun Ziha's tent that only recorded the 13th of the 12th month. There was nothing else after that. The writer must have died for the country in the battle that followed. This should be something recorded by a military secretary. The team of 10 arrived here on the 3rd of the 12th month, and all of them died in battle. All in all, it only took 10 days. There were also 6 days when it wasn't their turn to battle. At the back of the small notebook, there were many pages torn off. It should be the wills that the soldiers used to write. The last page was the one that said Sun Dabiao died in battle. There were a few words on the back. The handwriting was messy, as if it was erased after being written. Sun Zihu tried his best to distinguish it. When he finally made it out, he suddenly burst into tears. There were 4 words. I want to go home. Chapter 476. The war cries that lasted the entire night shook the heaven and earth. Sun Zihu and the Western elites who had just arrived were not in the mood to sleep in such an environment, so it was only natural that they found it harder to do so now. In spite of this, Sun Zihu had issued a death order. Sleep. Whoever can't sleep tonight will be punished as defying a military order. Also, the list of offenders will be reported to Marshal Wang. Marshal Wang will decide how to judge them. The order was extremely unreasonable, but it was the most appropriate one at the moment. To Sun Zihu, the reinforcements from the Western Front were the only time he and his brothers had to rest for the night. After this night, it would be blood and fire, life and death. Why had Han Sanhe launched such a ferocious attack at this time? One of the reasons was to prevent them from getting a good rest. If the 150,000 troops who had just arrived did not rest well, the damage to their overall combat power would be significant. The most direct result would be that Han Sanhe's Dongxian army would lose at least tens of thousands of men. It could even have a great impact on the entire battle. What are Sun Zihu and the rest doing? Fu Baogua, who was so tired that he was barely human, asked with bloodshot eyes after midnight. Snoring, thunderous snoring, answered a general. Well done. Fu Baogua nodded in satisfaction. Western troop elites indeed. The other generals also had looks of admiration on their faces. To be able to sleep in such an environment, they were no ordinary people. They were truly of exceptional quality. It looked like the Western troop elites, who had come as reinforcements, were not much weaker than the Eastern troop. We know that we should sleep and rest, but we really don't want to sleep, yet we have no choice. Firstly, Sun Xianfeng has given us a death order. Secondly, the threat is upon us. Disobeying a military order is secondary, but the key is that the violator will have to report back to Marshal Wang. If it's true, we'll be blacklisted as cowards. So we have to sleep even if we're beaten to death. Besides, only a good night's sleep and rest can we better deal with that damned Han Sanhe. When we've rested and rested well tomorrow, we'll settle the score with Dongxian. We'll let them know that Yutong's military isn't just limited to the Eastern troop, but the Western troop as well. The battle that lasted the entire night finally came to an end at dawn. Fu Baogua had paid a heavy price of 17,000 men in this battle. Dongxuan's army was even worse off. There were no less than 30,000 corpses left under the city, and at least 10,000 of those who were slightly injured managed to drag their lives back. In this offensive and defensive battle, both sides fought with all their might. The Steel Cavalry, who had been roaming the nearby forest in search of battle opportunities, had moved out more than 20 times that night. In just one night, they had used up all the arrows they had brought with them, leaving not a single one behind. It was only at the break of dawn on the second day that Fu Baogua could finally heave a sigh of relief. But Sun Zihu requested to fight. You're the one who knows the strength of the reinforcements at the Western Front the best, so you'll have full authority to command and assign your troops. Fu Baogua said, I only have one request. Buy us a day and a night of rest. Don't worry, General Fu. The Western troop will do their best. Even if they have to sacrifice their lives and be wiped out, the Fortress of Resilience will not fall. Sun Zihu returned the salute solemnly. What he had seen along the way during the long journey had made Sun Zihu truly understand the importance of the Fortress of Resilience. After the Fortress of Resilience, it was a vast expanse of flat land. There was no longer any danger to defend. Once this fortress was breached, Yutong would be exposed to the enemy naked at their mercy. It was no wonder that there were mountains of corpses and seas of blood every time they fought here. It was because this was the only path that the invading enemy had to pass through. If Dongxian wanted to invade Yutong, they would have to breach the Fortress of Resilience. Only by doing so could they talk about invading Yutong. As for crossing the two mountains on the side, it was not entirely impossible. The only condition was that Dongxuan's soldiers were experts of the fifth peak and above. That was all. Of course, even crossing the two mountains on the side of the Fortress of Resilience was not entirely safe. There were still countless steep cliffs and obstacles along the way. Even a cultivator, who had attained the fifth heaven of the peak realm, might not be able to cross it safely. This was the lesson that Dongxian had learned through countless bloody battles, since Yutong had built the Fortress of Resilience. Although Han Sanhe was the god of war of his generation, his intelligence unparalleled, he could only fight Fu Baogua head-on in front of the Fortress of Resilience. Other than that, there was no other way to bypass the Fortress of Resilience. Sun Zihu had followed Western Marshal Wang Yunju for more than a decade. He was a veteran of the battlefield, or else he would not have been entrusted with such a heavy responsibility by Wang Yunju to lead this expedition. He was indeed the person who was the most familiar, the most knowledgeable, and the most suitable to lead the Western reinforcements. Sun Zihu accepted the military order solemnly and arranged his troops immediately, splitting the 150,000 men into 5 waves. 30,000 men in each wave, replacing all the soldiers who were currently guarding the fortress. Many of the soldiers closed their eyes and started snoring the moment they were replaced. Some did not even leave their posts. There were even many who fell asleep standing up. Even Fu Baogua himself had shut his eyes immediately after giving his orders, and was carried back by the assistant general and janissary beside him. Marshal Fu had been sleeping all along the way. No one knew what he was dreaming about, but the janissary felt that the cotton jacket on his back had been drenched by the marshal's tears. Who would have believed that Yutong's renowned Marshal Fu Baogua, who had always been cold-hearted, would actually cry? Fu Baogua's assistant general and janissary were not surprised, for their eyes were filled with tears as well. The Fortress of Resilience, Yutong's 400,000 brothers at the eastern border, including the martial world's reinforcements and ordinary citizens who had volunteered to join the war, amounted to less than 450,000 men. Up until now, there were only 230,000 men left. In other words, up until now, a total of 180,000 brothers had fallen at the Fortress of Resilience forever. Now, none of the warriors in the Fortress of Resilience dared to gather. Even after the war, when they were at their most tired, those generals who were used to drinking a little to relieve their fatigue and get together with their brothers were now drinking alone and crying as they drank. They dared not greet or call for friends, only wishing to drink alone. It was because the people who used to drink with them could not be gathered no matter how they called for them now. The 8 brothers who used to drink together had suddenly become 3, then 2. How did the 2 of them feel when they were together? It was not drinking, it was digging their hearts out, one by one. That night, every soldier who had been relieved of their duties, after waking up from their deep slumber, immediately burst into loud sobs that were filled with suppressed emotions. Looking at the neatly arranged wills left by their comrades beside them, looking at the money they had left behind to beg for them to bring home for the army, recalling how their brothers had roared and used their chests to block the saber that was slashing at them, blocking the arrows that were aimed at them with their own bodies, recalling how the cunning fellow had taken a big stride in front of them and turned into a porcupine by the countless arrows. He had turned into a porcupine. Turning back, he was still laughing with blood foaming in his mouth. F***ck. I've been cunning all my life. I've been impulsive this time. I've really been impulsive. Then his comrades who had fallen, recalling how the brothers had laughed and patted his shoulder when they had gone to war. If I die in battle, you must help me take care of my mother. If I die in battle, I'll entrust my family to you. If I die in battle, my child is still young. Brother, you'll have to work hard. This is the divorce letter. If I die in battle, don't tell my family about my death. Send the divorce letter back first, and let that woman go. We'll talk about it later. She's too stubborn. If I were to send the news of my death back now, she would really guard me for the rest of her life. You haven't found a wife yet. Just nice. If I die in battle, you can come to my house. My wife is pretty and gentle. You can marry into my family and help me take care of my child. If you feel uncomfortable, you can change your surname to yours. At that time, my mother will be your mother, my son will be your son, and my wife will be your wife. Thinking of these entrusted tasks, everyone burst into tears. When they had spoken, there had been laughter. There had even been scuffles and curses, but now that they thought of it, it was heart-wrenching. Fu Baogua woke up in the middle of the night, his eyes staring at the ceiling listlessly. After a while, he suddenly covered his mouth, tears streaming down his cheeks like a flood. Clutching his chest, he felt the excruciating pain as he sobbed. 180,000 brothers. Gone just like that. He sucked in deep breaths, the pain in his heart making it hard for him to breathe. It was said that a general's heart should be like iron. But how could a general's heart be like iron? Even if it was like iron, it was not real iron after all. It would still hurt. The agony seeped into his bones. It had only been a day, but Fu Baogua and the eastern border troops' heart-wrenching agony had been thoroughly tasted by the western troop, who had come as reinforcements. The bitterness of it was truly heart-wrenching for every soldier of the western troop. Han Sanha's probing attack alone had caused the western troop to lose more than 2,000 men in a straight line. This was really just Han Sanha's probing attack. His ultimate goal was to find out who the reinforcements from yesterday were. He had to find out who they were before he could devise a targeted strategy. Chapter 477. After the probing attack, Han Sanha could sense the identity of the newcomer at once. The frontline battlefield had been changed. The troops had been changed, and the way they fought was obviously different. Even though they were all elite troops, they each had their own distinguishing features and style. The new relief troops' individual combat ability was even higher than the Eastern troops, and their teamwork was excellent as well. Although the Western troop had lost more than 2,000 men in this wave of probing attack, Dongxian had lost more than 5,000 soldiers, almost 2.5 times the loss. Such combat power, such training, they should be Yutong's elites from other directions. The northern troop, Taizheng, was fighting while the southern troop could barely fend for themselves. Naturally, it was the western troop who had come. Among Yutong's military, only the western troop possessed outstanding individual combat ability, due to the fact that they had been fighting against Zio's army, which was known to be the continent's best in terms of individual combat ability. However, there seemed to be only a handful of people in the western troop who possessed such a commanding ability. However, the western line needed Wang Yunju to oversee it, so the commander of this war must be Wang Yunju's best general, Sun Zihu. The grandson had come. Han Sanha was indeed the top general of the continent. He had swiftly guessed the reinforcement troops' capabilities, and even locked onto the identity of the commander. With a single thought, he retreated from the attack immediately. After the time it took to drink half a cup of tea, a large flag was raised. Sun Zihu, why have you come all the way here to die? What are you waiting for if you don't surrender now? Seeing this, Sun Zihu flew into a rage. Without another word, he shot out an arrow and shot the flag down. In spite of this, he had also confirmed the other party's guess. In the next 3 days, the unusually brutal war escalated rapidly. The Western troops' elites who were used to fighting tough battles in the West were gradually overwhelmed by the tactical atmosphere. This was not a war at all. It was a bunch of lunatics playing a game with human lives. It was not that their individual combat ability and teamwork tactics were useless, but they could only be used to a limited extent. Yutong's desire to protect the country and its people, their sense of duty to not be annihilated was one thing. They were not afraid of death. Dongxian, on the other hand, was an invader. How could they be so valiant? They truly deserved the title of the continent's top military power. Even if the enemies were attacking or besieging the city, their movements were neat and tidy, without the slightest hint of disorder. Even in the face of his comrades who were falling from the city wall like raindrops, his expression did not change, and his performance of the 4 words, wave upon wave, was like a textbook. No matter how great the sacrifices in front were, they still charged forward wave after wave, fearlessly charging forward. Sun Zihu looked into the distance, and saw that on the other side of the enemy's formation, there was a large row of 500 military law enforcers with cold glints in their hands. If he moved forward, the saber in his hand would fall. There was a slim chance of survival if they advanced, but retreating meant certain death. With this realization, the Dongxian soldiers knew how to choose. Was there not a slim chance of survival? There was still a chance of survival compared to certain death. In spite of this, fighting Dongxian soldiers personally, and experiencing Han Sanha's strictness in managing his troops, Sun Zihu felt a chill in his heart. Why was he ranked number 1 on the continent? Why was he the god of war? In this battle, the momentum, power, and intimidation of his battle strategy had been fully displayed. The strict laws, the strict discipline, the elite troops, the overwhelming attacks, coupled with a group of crazy generals and soldiers, the combat power of the army was rising exponentially. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Before this, Marshal Fu Baogua had been facing such a strong opponent, but he had never been at a disadvantage. The fortress of resilience had never fallen. He was indeed the top man of Yutong's younger generation, whom even Marshal Wang admitted he was inferior to. He lived up to his reputation. How many of our brothers have gone? This was the question that Sun Zihu had to ask with a grim expression every day after the battle ended. He did not want to ask. He did not want to hear the answer. Perhaps he did not dare to. However, he had to ask and he had to hear it now. In spite of this, Sun Zihu's heart trembled each time he heard the casualty figures. The Western troop that he had brought with him was 150,000 elite men from the western border. They had only fought for 4 days, and a third of them were gone. 50,000 brothers are gone, just like that. After confirming the number, Sun Zihu's heart was bleeding. General Sun. Fu Baoguo walked over solemnly. Marshal Fu. Sun Zihu stood up and saluted. General Sun. This marshal would like to first express my gratitude to you, to the western border's reinforcements. It's your hard work, your contributions, and your sacrifices that have earned us 4 days of time. This time has far exceeded this marshal's expectations. Thank you. Fu Baoguo was filled with gratitude. I dare not accept it. We're all Yutong's people. We're all soldiers of the military. This is our duty, it's only right and proper. I, Sun Zihu, really can't accept Marshal Fu's thanks. Sun Zihu said. If it had been any other day, Sun Zihu would never have replied like this when he heard Fu Baoguo's words. He would have been furious. What did he mean by earning us 4 days of time? What did he mean by this far exceeded his expectations? Who were you looking down on? In spite of this, Sun Zihu, who had truly experienced Han Sanha's power, dared not say anything else. Facing Han Sanha, he would not be timid nor would he give up on the battle. But he could not help but feel a tinge of guilt. Even after each battle, Sun Zihu would feel a little dazed. Had he made it through? Did I survive another attack from the #1 general of the continent? At this moment, he knew that Fu Baoguo's words were sincere. There was no other meaning to it. It was genuine gratitude and admiration, as well as heartfelt admiration. This marshal also knows that your heart is aching. Fu Baoguo said calmly, you're aching for your brothers. I understand how you feel because I'm aching as well. But this is a battlefield. Sun Zihu said loudly. Yes, this humble general understands. You don't understand, at least not completely. Do you know that we don't have time to feel heartache now? Fu Baoguo said clearly. The empire's survival depends on this battle. Our brothers who are lying on the ground will never be lonely, because there will be more brothers who will accompany them in batches. Those brothers who are going to accompany them, that includes you, that includes me. Even all the warriors in the Fortress of Resilience, no one is an exception. Fu Baoguo's eyes were gleaming. But, before we go to accompany our brothers, we can't throw away the honor of being Yutong's militants. We have to fulfill our duty, and fulfill our duty as Yutong's people. Do you understand? Yes. Sun Zihu answered loudly. The gaze he used to look at Fu Baoguo now was like he was looking at Marshal Wang Yunju, whom he had respected his entire life. It could be discerned from Fu Baoguo's words. This Marshal Fu didn't even think about going back alive. He was obviously prepared to bury himself under the Fortress of Resilience. The Western troops have helped us hold out for 4 days. It's enough. Fu Baoguo turned to look at his subordinates. Now let the Western brothers rest. Eastern troops go up. Another 3 days passed. Marshal, a section of the wall, might not be able to hold out any longer. Fu Baoguo's vision darkened when he received the news from his personal guard. Had the thing he was most afraid of finally come? The Fortress of Resilience had always been known as the world's strongest fort. The entire wall of the Fortress of Resilience was 10 feet thick. Its main body was made of the toughest mountain rock, with countless steel materials mixed in. After the last battle, Taizheng had mobilized the entire army and almost emptied the mountain on the opposite side. The outer layer of the wall on the east side of the Fortress of Resilience was thickened by another 20 feet, and the entire wall was 10 feet taller. This 30 feet thick, majestic wall built entirely of stone was Fu Baoguo's greatest confidence in defending the Fortress of Resilience. Now, under the relentless attack of Dongshuan's troop, this world's strongest fort that had been reinforced and repaired far better than it had been in the beginning had finally suffered damage and a gap. There did not need to be many of such gaps. Just one, any one of them, could wipe out the natural defenses of the Fortress of Resilience. It could even mean that the fortress of resilience had been breached. Repair it quickly, repair it at full speed. We should repair it as soon as something like this happens. Fu Baoguo's expression was steely. Marshal Fu, the gap in the wall can't be repaired. The Janissary general's expression was grim as well, a scar on his forehead still oozing blood. The gap is on the abdomen, right in the middle. It's protruding outwards now. Fu Baoguo's body swayed when he heard the news. The middle of the wall was protruding outwards. This was definitely the most fatal damage, the kind that was second to none. Now, as long as Han Sanha sent his men to attack this point, even if they could defend it with all their might, the prolonged pressure would only make the protruding part protrude more and more. The final outcome would be a cave-in. Once the collapse was real, it would be the end of the Fortress of Resilience, and the end of the Fortress of Resilience. How much is it protruding? Fu Baoguo asked anxiously. A handful, the Janissary general answered. Fu Baoguo turned and walked in that direction while Sun Zihu and the rest followed closely with grim expressions. As generals of the border, they understood the severity of the situation and wanted to know what was going on. Fu Baoguo looked down from the top of the wall. It was as he expected. Below, about 30 feet from the top of the wall, there were two large rocks protruding slightly. Perhaps the front wall was inconspicuous and insignificant, but to the Fortress of Resilience, it was a fatal flaw. The collapse of a 100-mile dike was caused by an ant's nest. The collapse of an undefeatable fort at a single point was more than enough. It was too fatal. With Han Sanha's experience, military training and sharp vision, he would never let go of this place. In fact, the reason why Han Sanha had attacked so fiercely without regard for the cost was because he was waiting for this moment. Chapter 478. Based on my current estimation, I can hold on for another 3 days at most. Fu Baoguo shut his eyes tightly, feeling like he had used up all his strength. If he had not been holding on, he would have collapsed to the ground. Hundreds of thousands of lives had been lost here. Could it be that they could not hold on any longer? Fu Baoguo had thought that the Fortress of Resilience could hold on for at least another 20 days under his command. Unless he was faced with a tragic situation where he had no soldiers to deploy, the Fortress of Resilience would never fall. No matter how capable Han Sanha was, he could only attack and defend in a well-behaved manner. After fighting for some time, the reinforcements kept coming, especially the Western troops' arrival, which gave Fu Baoguo more confidence. The military intelligence also informed him that old Marshal Qiu Jianhan was rushing here with his army. They would arrive at the Fortress of Resilience in a day at most. This made Fu Baoguo's hope grow. He was confident that he could definitely hold on until old Marshal Qiu arrived. Once the troops were united, they could fight Han Sanha together. Then, Yutong's army would only need to hold on until the 9 Supreme's lords came to help, and the eastern border would be completely safe. Alternatively, they could continue to hold on and exhaust Dongxuan's million-strong army to the point where both countries could no longer hold on, and the war would naturally end. Even though Dongxian had sent the entire nation's military force to invade, the Fortress of Resilience had the eastern border, the western border's elites, and old Marshal Qiu's reinforcements. Their capability was not too far behind, especially when they had an impregnable fortress like the Fortress of Resilience to rely on. The defending side would still have the upper hand in a battle. If they continued to wear the enemy down, Dongxian would suffer a greater loss based on the current casualty ratio. Yutong's chance of winning this war had risen from the initial 10% to the current 30%. The tide had turned. However, Fu Baoguo realized that his assessment was only his own wishful thinking. Han Sanha was indeed Tianquan's publicly acknowledged top general. He wondered if he had been planning for this since the beginning. If so, he would be terrifying. Such a drastic change in the Fortress of Resilience's walls made Fu Baoguo lose all hope. The old marshal's troops were about to arrive and the tide of the war was about to turn. But at this crucial moment, a flaw had appeared. The wall was faulty. Unfortunately, there was no way to repair such a position. Could it be that the heavens want me dead? That the heavens want Yutong dead? Fu Baoguo let out a long sigh. Chance. The chance that Han Sanha had been waiting for had finally arrived. Everyone charge. We must take down the Fortress of Resilience within the next day and night. Han Sanha issued his orders. No matter the cost, no casualties. We must take down the Fortress of Resilience. Even if the 300,000 soldiers in this battle are to be sacrificed. All the Dongxian warriors were baffled by Han Sanha's crazy order. But even though they were puzzled, this order was strictly carried out. Everyone went out to make their preparations. They were determined to fight to the death, determined to fight to the death. Zhang Ge looked at his teacher. Teacher, the situation we're most happy to see has happened. There's a huge problem with the enemy's wall, and it's already foreseeable that the Fortress of Resilience will be ours. However, this should also be when the enemy's resistance is at its strongest. Launching an all-out attack now will definitely increase the number of casualties. There was no need to pay such a huge price at such a time. Zhang Ge was bewildered. Speed is crucial in war. We must take down the Fortress of Resilience before Qiu Jianhan arrives. Otherwise, there won't be a chance like this anymore. Han Sanha sighed softly. We can at least drag it out for a month. There are pros and cons to this. The situation is already leaning towards us. Even if that old man Qiu Jianhan arrives, can he turn the situation around? Zhang Ge was still bewildered. Zhang Ge, you're a man who understands war. Can you really not see the current situation clearly? If it weren't for the flaw in the enemy's wall at this delicate juncture, the tide of the war would have been turned around completely. The tide would no longer be on our side. Han Sanha said in a low voice. Zhang Ji's expression changed as he said seriously. Teacher, it's obvious that we have the upper hand in the current situation. Even without the flaw in the wall, taking down the Fortress of Resilience is only a matter of time. Why do we have to go this far? Han Sanha shook his head and said after a pause. Dongxuan's entire military force has been gathered here in this war. While it's impressive, there are many hidden threats on our side as well. If it weren't for the Four-Nation Alliance to besiege Yutong back then, this old man would never have suggested such extreme measures. If Zio could have killed Supreme Cloud in one fell swoop, there was no need to kill him. As long as he was trapped, Yutong would be annihilated in a short amount of time. However, not only did Supreme Cloud break out of the siege during the battle in Zio's capital, Zilong City, he completely shocked Zio's higher-ups. The Emperor of Zio also realized his own shortcomings because of that battle and ordered the Zio army that had already set out to retreat. Now Yutong's western border is safe for the time being. There's also the southern border. After Supreme Cloud left Zilong City, he unexpectedly galloped to the southern border and joined the battle forcefully, causing the southern army to suffer a great blow to De Yuan. Although the empire of De Yuan's total military strength was not greatly damaged, their morale has fallen to rock bottom. They can no longer fight. With Tai Zheng guarding the north personally, it's as stable as a mountain. Therefore, the only four-nation war that still has a chance of taking down Yutong is our eastern border. However, Fu Baoguo's capability has greatly exceeded my expectations. The Steel Cavalry's harassment strategy that he has arranged has affected our supply line to a certain extent. The western border's reinforcements that have just arrived have stabilized the precarious Fortress of Resilience. If we wait for Qiu Jianhan's reinforcements, I can say with certainty that even if Supreme Cloud doesn't join the battle, and Yutong is defeated, Dongxian will definitely fall as well. Now, do you still think that the situation is in our favor? Zhang Ji's expression changed drastically. Attacking the Fortress of Resilience in the most extreme way will cost many lives, but it has bought us time. If we really wait for Qiu Jianhan to come and take down the Fortress of Resilience, I'm afraid we'll have to pay 400,000 or even more. And there's still time. Why? The flaw is already there. It can't be changed. Zhang Ge was puzzled. Could it be that Han Sanha could repair the wall just because he was here? Han Sanha did not answer, only sighing. The blizzard began to fall once more. Amidst the blizzard, the war drums in Dongxuan's military camp suddenly thundered. Countless enemy troops surged up like a tidal wave. The long siege ladder was like a forest. Han Sanha has discovered it. He's already launching his attack on this point. Fu Baoguo roared with all his might. All brothers who can move, be it the eastern or western troops, defend with all your might. So many of us? There's no need to do this. Sun Zihu was shocked. Han Sanha's attack this time will be an unprecedented all-out attack. It's an extreme attack. Fu Baoguo closed his eyes. We have to give it our all as well. Otherwise, the fortress of resilience will be lost from our hands before the old marshal arrives. If that happens, Yutong will really be in danger. This was a war that was destined to be devastating. This day was the 22nd of the 12th lunar month. Many years after the war, everyone in both countries remembered this date. Because of this day, it became a common holiday between the two countries. In Dongxian, it was known as War Souls Day. In Yutong, it was known as Loyal Souls Day. Every day on this day, the Empire of Dongxian would fall into silence and have a day of rest. Yutong, on the other hand, would wear white mourning cloaks on this day. Incense and candles filled the air. The war was so devastating that in the end, both Yutong and Dongxian, even the elite veterans who had survived hundreds of battles, and the iron-blooded men, who were used to witnessing life and death, wailed as they fought. It was too tragic. The top of the Fortress of Resilience's wall was filled with battles that were almost non-stop. No, it was no longer almost, it was a fierce battle all the time. Many of the exhausted Yutong soldiers, who had been struggling to hold on, used up the last bit of their strength. When they saw the enemy charging up the top of the wall, they charged up with their own bodies and hugged the enemy, charging down the wall that was 150 feet tall together, crashing to the ground below. This was their last resort. They would perish together with the enemy and go to the netherworld. In the end, they were not willing to lose anything. People were falling from the top of the wall like dumplings being dropped into a pot. War cries intertwined with each other, ringing endlessly. Steam billowed high into the sky, melting the falling snow in midair and turning it into droplets of rain that fell to the ground. However, even the rain could not wash away the gurgling blood on the ground. On such a frigid day, countless warriors were bare-chested, their hair disheveled as they fought in a frenzy. Their bodies were covered in crisscrossing scars. A warrior's scars had always been a badge of glory, and they were all exposed in front of everyone at this very moment. Regardless of friend or foe, everyone was fighting in a frenzy. The drumbeats shook the heavens. Fu Baoguo yelled at the top of his lungs, "Steel cavalry! Fight!" To reduce the pressure on the wall, the steel cavalry had reached the point where they had to fight. Once they were out, it was a battle to the death. For Yutong. For father and mother. For brothers. Kill. The tightly shut city gate opened abruptly. Yutong's steel cavalry charged out like a raging dragon, crushing the Dongxian soldiers who were besieging the city with an unstoppable force. However, the steel cavalry was immediately drowned in the sea of Dongxian soldiers. There were too many Dongxian soldiers in front of them. Even with the steel cavalry's charge, they could not disperse, break, or even move. The dense rain of arrows fell like a downpour. When they fell, be it rain or snowflakes, they were all blocked by the rain of arrows. The steel cavalry charged to and fro in the enemy's formation like a raging dragon, trying their best to disrupt the rhythm of the reinforcement troops. Han Sanha's headquarters responded swiftly. Their old rival, the Shadow Cavalry, was already prepared, waiting for Yutong's steel cavalry's arrival. Yutong's steel cavalry had been in the limelight all this time. The Shadow Cavalry had long been seething with hatred. Now that the steel cavalry had finally entered the battlefield, they charged forward at once, launching the most extreme of attacks. One of the steel horsemen and his 3 brothers were separated from their group by the enemy, but they still charged forward with all their might, sweeping away all who stood in their way. The surrounding black horsemen were thrown off their horses, and in the blink of an eye, at least 20 to 30 corpses fell to the ground. However, his 3 brothers also fell off their horses one after the other, turning into meat paste. Seeing that the steel cavalry man was alone, the enemies who were already in a frenzy of bloodlust swarmed forward, intending to dismember him. Unexpectedly, the man raised his saber to the sky and roared thunderously, "Hold it!" When the surrounding Shadow Cavalry heard this, They were all stunned and stopped in unison. Until now, be it the Steel Cavalry or the Shadow Cavalry, despite the deep hatred they had for each other, there was also a similar level of admiration alongside the hatred. The Steel Cavalry lived up to their name of invincibility. The Shadow Cavalry lived up to their title of warriors. Faced with the order to stop at the last moment from the strongest enemy they had ever met, the Shadow Cavalry soldiers retracted their weapons in unison. The man stood proudly on his horse and guffawed. The Shadow Cavalry is indeed an elite troop, who is qualified to fight with my Steel Cavalry brothers for a lifetime. Just the fact that you stopped now is enough for me to think highly of you. He raised his saber and said faintly, "The 3 brothers who charged with me were my 3 younger brothers from the same mother. Now that they're gone, as their eldest brother, I can't possibly let them fall into the netherworld, and not even be able to recognize their parents, can I? So allow me to fix their appearances." As he spoke, he leaped down like there was no one else around and strode forward in the forest of Shadow Cavalry, searching for the corpses of his 3 brothers, and dragging them out one by one. In an open space, he wrung his blood-soaked battle robe, and spat out a mouthful of saliva to wipe the faces of his brothers. However, the more he wiped, the redder their faces became. The more he wiped, the harder it was to see the true faces of the 3 people. "Catch!" A general of the Shadow Cavalry suddenly hollered, pulling the white towel from his neck and tossing it over. Another Shadow Cavalry soldier untied his water sack and tossed it over as well. "Haha, thanks a lot. Your father owes you." The man dipped the white towel in water and wiped his brothers' faces clean. He then stood up quietly and said loudly, "When you get there, remember to tell father and mother that we came together to fight for the country, to protect Yutong. It's an honorable death to die in the battlefield. We didn't embarrass father and mother. The only thing we've let down is that the 4 of us didn't leave any bloodline for old Xiao family. This is all my fault as the eldest. You all go to serve father and mother. I don't have to go. Such a grave mistake. I'll only embarrass father and mother if I go." Before his words echoed in the air, he burst into laughter, revealing his pearly white teeth. Blood flowed from his abdomen, but he did not seem to feel it. With a flip of his muscular body, he mounted his horse again and pointed the saber in his hand forward. "Warriors of the Shadow Cavalry, thank you for your towels and water sacks. However, as the invader and the victim, which one of you will accompany me, Boss Chiao, on the road?" The general of the Shadow Cavalry was stoic, his eyes glinting as he said loudly, "You, Boss Chiao, are a good man? We the Shadow Cavalry brothers are not cowards either. However, this is a war between 2 armies. We the Shadow Cavalry will not fight you alone foolishly. Arrows!" With his command, the Shadow Cavalry around him knocked their bows and aimed their arrows at Boss Chiao. Just like the general said, we the Shadow Cavalry are not cowards. We know that the enemy will die, but we will not risk losing another man to go with you. We are not that stupid. Amidst Boss Chiao's earth-shattering laughter, the rain of arrows poured down like a waterfall. Boss Chiao's laughter had yet to stop. The long saber in his hand had already left his hand like a bolt of lightning. At the same time, he and his horse had turned into a black porcupine. Iron porcupine. The long saber moved like lightning, flying over the heads of the Shadow Cavalry soldiers, cutting a Shadow Cavalry soldier and his horse in half 100 feet away. In the face of death, he still wanted to take a life with him. Since he had the will to die, how could he not reap the rewards? "Salute!" The general of the Shadow Cavalry gave the order, and all the Shadow Cavalry soldiers raised their hands in salute to their enemy. In the final moments of his life, he had chosen to let these Shadow Cavalry soldiers off, because they had given him time, towels and water sacks. That final desperate strike was unstoppable. No one present had the confidence to block it. Boss Chiao had chosen to throw the saber out at the last moment, killing the enemy in the distance. He had not killed anyone around him. That was his final gift. Boss Chiao, who was like a human-shaped porcupine, still had his last breath. He and his horse stood silently, his muscular body still sitting on the horse, his back straight. As his blood dripped, he mustered the last bit of his strength to turn his neck as if he wanted to turn his head to look at the fortress of resilience that was in the midst of a fierce battle. However, his last movement and last wish suddenly froze. He stopped moving. He had completely stopped moving. The general of the Shadow Cavalry urged his horse forward and bowed silently, saying in a low voice, "Don't worry. At least the moment you die in battle, the fortress of resilience has yet to be breached." With a crash, Boss Chiao and his horse fell to the ground, as if his last wish had been fulfilled, and he had died without regrets. The Steel Cavalry only had one mission that night: to charge into the enemy's formation with all their might, to reduce the pressure on the wall as much as possible. A total of 5,000 Steel Cavalry charged into the enemy's formation. Not a single one of them retreated, and not a single one of them fled. Everyone fought to the last moment. The leading general had the highest cultivation base and the strongest combat ability among the 5,000 Steel Cavalry. In the end, he charged left and right in Dongxuan's formation single-handedly, unstoppable. Wherever he passed, his spear was like rain and his sword like thunder. No one could withstand his charge. There were enemies all around him, new wounds appearing on his body continuously. However, he did not care. When the battle was nearing its end, as he looked around, he realized that the Shadow Cavalry had regrouped into their formation, while his comrades were silent. With a loud roar, he turned his horse around abruptly and roared like a thunderclap. "Han Sanha, die!" The man and the horse charged towards the central camp where Han Sanha was, like an arrow. He was charging into the marshal's camp alone, amidst a million-strong army. No one dared mock or ridicule such an unwise move. Only the sound of his hooves thundering and his spear striking like lightning could be heard. He was still unstoppable like the wind and lightning. Along the way, more than 70 soldiers of the Shadow Cavalry had perished on his path. Arrows! A loud cry came from afar. Hundreds of thousands of arrows rained down from all directions. It was a large-scale, indiscriminate attack that enveloped the many Shadow Cavalry soldiers who had gathered around the Steel Cavalry general. It could not be helped. Although the Steel Cavalry general was far from threatening Han Sanha's life, Dongxuan's higher-ups could not allow him to continue advancing like this. Otherwise, it would affect their side even more. Even if they had to sacrifice some of the Shadow Cavalry soldiers, they would not hesitate. Seeing the rain of arrows coming, the Shadow Cavalry general did not evade. Instead, he raised his spear and roared one last time. "The Steel Cavalry is here! Who dares invade my land?" The frenzied rain of arrows turned the Steel Cavalry general into a monument on the path of the charge. Even in death, the warhorse maintained its charging stance. The rider was still standing straight, his spear still gripped tightly in his hands. His eyes that were filled with hatred were still staring in the direction where Han Sanha's marshal's flag was fluttering. His mouth was slightly agape as if he was about to let out another thunderous roar. "The Steel Cavalry is here! Who dares invade my land? The Steel Cavalry is here! Who dares invade my land?" For some reason, a black cavalry general shuddered. "Who is this? He's killed more than 400 of my brothers along the way. I can't wait to kill this bastard with my own hands." No one answered. "Bury him." A Shadow Cavalry soldier walked forward slowly and helped the Steel Cavalry general off his horse. However, the spear in his hand glinted coldly. No matter how hard the Shadow Cavalry soldier tried, he could not pull it out. His other hand was gripped tightly on his sword as well, unable to loosen his fingers no matter how hard he tried. He was using his life to prove that whether he was alive or dead, he would fight until the very end unwavering. Man and horse, along with saber and sword, bury them all. The Shadow Cavalry general could not hold back his tears anymore. In the face of such an enemy, who wouldn't admire him? The sounds of battle intensified abruptly. On the top of the fort, the drums thundered. Amidst the rain of arrows, Yutong's supreme marshal in the Fortress of Resilience, Fu Baogua, appeared at the highest point of the fort. "I am Fu Baogua." Fu Baogua's thunderous roar reverberated in the snowstorm, his voice reverberating throughout the universe. The entire battlefield could hear him. "I am here. Life and death are here. Fight." It was only 2 short sentences, barely a few words in total, but Yutong's side felt as if they had been injected with adrenaline. The marshal had come to the battlefield personally. He was standing at the most dangerous place, watching our battle. What else could they hesitate about? Fight! Fight! Fight to the death! Fight to the end! Fight to the end! Protect our homeland! For our comrades! For our parents! The soldiers roared thunderously. Their bodies that were initially sluggish from exhaustion suddenly became agile, their combat power increasing tremendously, as if they were aided by God. In Dongxuan's formation, deicide bow, shoot Fu Baoguo with all you've got. Countless arrows from the deicide bow converged into a torrential river, drawing a pitch-black trail in the air, as they charged at Fu Baoguo. Chapter 479. Fu Baoguo stood unmoving amidst the rain of arrows. His eyes were calm and sharp as he paid close attention to the movements of Dongxuan's troops, constantly giving orders and commanding the troops. This was the most crucial moment. The countless personal guards around him raised their swords and shields, doing their best to resist the arrows that were like a tide. From time to time, the personal guards would let out muffled groans. That was because they did not dare to cry out in pain for fear of lowering their own morale. As long as the people who were hit by the arrows were fine, they would immediately retreat. They all knew that even if they were to die, they could not die here. If they died here, it would only cause trouble for their comrades who were fighting bravely. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, 40 to 50 personal guards had died in battle. However, even at the moment of death, no one made a sound. Fu Baoguo stood there for a long time unmoving. He was still issuing orders in an orderly manner, without the slightest bit of chaos. It was as if he didn't see the rain of arrows. He could not move. Yutong's warriors' exhaustion, and even their morale had reached its limit. Standing here was the last resort he could use. Yutong's marshal was still here, sharing life and death with everyone. This was the final source of morale. Once Fu Baoguo made a move, the morale would plummet and crumble. Fu Baoguo understood this very well, and had long since realized it. Even if I'm turned into a hedgehog today, but I still have to stand here, and hold on until the very last moment. The guards desperately blocked the heavy deicide bows, many of them crying, "Marshal, let's retreat, our brothers can't hold on any longer." Fu Baoguo had a total of 1,000 janissaries. 500 of them had died in the continuous battle. Today, there were a total of 160 people who had come with Fu Baoguo. But now, there were less than 50 of them who were still fighting, doing their best to protect Fu Baoguo. The remaining 110 people had already turned into human-shaped hedgehogs that were pierced with countless deicide bows and arrows. As Fu Baoguo's personal guards, each of them had long been prepared to die protecting Marshal Fu. However, it was one thing to be prepared, but they also had an understanding of the current crisis. They could sacrifice themselves for Fu Baoguo without hesitation, but they were unwilling to see Fu Baoguo die. However, the current situation was an unstoppable death. Only by avoiding it would they have a chance of survival. However, Fu Baoguo did not move. The only outcome would be all of them dying under the rain of arrows. Even if all the personal guards died here, it would not change the outcome. If the Fortress of Resilience falls today, I, Fu Baoguo, shall die for my country. I've made a promise to live and die with the Fortress of Resilience. Today is the day I, Fu Baoguo, fulfill my promise. Fu Baoguo shouted loudly. If the Fortress of Resilience is defended today, I, Fu Baoguo, will still be here. The sound was deafening, and it could actually be heard clearly on the battlefield. Today, at this very moment, I, Fu Baoguo, am the Fortress of Resilience. The enemy's drums boomed as Han Sanha ordered coldly. Send another 100,000 reinforcements and attack with all you've got. Take down the Fortress of Resilience. Dongxuan's formation was activated once more. Countless soldiers surged towards the Fortress of Resilience like a tidal wave as a deafening roar resounded. Take down the Fortress of Resilience. Take down the Fortress of Resilience. Capture Fu Baoguo alive. The personal guards no longer tried to persuade Fu Baoguo, saving their breath to muster their remaining strength to deal with the rain of arrows. Those who could become Fu Baoguo's personal guards were naturally his trusted aides, so they knew what Fu Baoguo was thinking. Since the marshal had the intention to die for his country, the few of them could only stay here and show their loyalty to the country. The least they could do was to be a step ahead of the marshal. Before all of us perish, we must not let the marshal fall. The enemy began to mobilize their formation again, charging faster and faster as they drew closer. In the middle of the night, Han Sanha had already sent 100,000 soldiers towards the Fortress of Resilience. The situation could no longer be described as shocking. It was madness, extreme madness. The 100,000 soldiers did not include those who were still alive. In other words, there were 100,000 soldiers who had lost their lives at the Fortress of Resilience. Now another 100,000 soldiers were sent to charge the enemy. Sun Zihu had brought his Western troop brothers, the most elite combat force of the western border, but they were already numb from the battle. Watching the soldiers from both sides disappear in groups, the shock in their hearts had long surpassed the limits of what they could bear. So this was how the Eastern troop fought. So, this was the situation that Han Sanha had to face. So the battle here was actually so bloody and cruel. The so-called top general of the continent, the world's top fortress, and Yutong's top troop were all true to their reputations. Respect rose in Sun Zihu's heart. The Eastern troop is called the top troop of Yutong. It lives up to its name indeed. We can never hope to match it in this lifetime. Looking at Fu Baoguo, who was still standing tall and straight, Sun Zihu's heart was filled with respect. Fu Baoguo was indeed the top young man of Yutong's military. The Eastern troop is a hero, but we, the Western troop, are not cowards. Sun Zihu slashed 3 of his enemies off the wall with a single slash of his saber, moving swiftly as he shouted, "Brothers, we will live and die with the Fortress of Resilience today. We won't let our brothers from the Eastern troop have the upper hand. We swear to live and die with the land of Yutong, to live and die together, to live and to perish together." Countless Western soldiers roared in a frenzy, their emotions unprecedentedly agitated. The battle was getting more and more intense, but it was progressing in an unfavorable direction. There was no reversal because of Fu Baoguo's disregard for his own safety, as he stood under the rain of arrows, and the western border's extreme outburst. More and more Dongxian soldiers popped their heads out from the top of the wall. Many of them had already charged up to the top of the wall to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the defending troops. High up on the wall, the leader of the Janissaries swung his sword and shield with all his might, deflecting the incoming arrows. But Fu Baoguo was already pierced by 2 arrows. In spite of this, he was still standing there, commanding with composure, without a hint of panic. "Marshal." The leader of the Janissaries let out a low grunt. His shoulder had been pierced by an arrow, but it was followed by a wail of grief. The cry of the bodyguard leader was not for himself, but, "Marshal, I can't protect you anymore." Fu Baoguo extended his hand, his sword unsheathing from under his ribs. Maintaining his standing position, he waved his sword personally to block the arrows as he hollered, "Order! 30,000 steel cavalry to leave the fort and fight Dongxian to the death. The rest of the steel cavalry, and the serving troop, disperse and follow the original plan, to build another fortress of resilience for Yutong's army." It was the final moment. Fu Baoguo knew that he could not hold on any longer. His own life was at stake, so he gave his last order immediately. "Even if I, Fu Baoguo, die here today, Han Sanha, you'll have to pay with at least 100,000 lives if you want to enter the Fortress of Resilience." Just as the order was given, a white silhouette suddenly appeared beside Fu Baoguo, amidst the rain of arrows. Sword light flashed, and sliced all the arrows that were shot at him in half. Everyone who saw the exquisite swordsmanship gasped in awe. But the white silhouette's sword light did not stop there. It formed an indestructible barrier in front of Fu Baoguo, with its majestic sword light. All the deicide arrows were broken in front of this net of light. At the same time, a series of war drums rang out without warning. Dong dong dong. Countless Yutong soldiers charged up the fort like ferocious tigers, engaging the Dongxian soldiers on top of the fort. The Fortress of Resilience's perilous situation was abruptly alleviated. A troop galloped over, led by a man with fluttering white hair and a fierce expression. As he charged forward, he hollered, Fu Baogua, your father orders you. Come down now. Hearing the voice, Fu Baogua's mind relaxed abruptly. Old Marshal Chiu had arrived. One of Yutong's strongest reinforcements had arrived. He had finally held out until old Marshal Chiu arrived. Countless cavalrymen charged out of the Fortress of Resilience, like a tidal wave. They flowed endlessly like streams returning to their roots, their momentum unstoppable. Qiu Jianhan's reinforcements had finally arrived. They had arrived at the Fortress of Resilience's most critical moment. Working with Fu Baogua's steel cavalry, hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen charged out at the same time. With just a charge, they had forced Han Sanhe's attacking troop back to where they stood, immobilizing them. At this time, a deafening gong rang in Han Sanhe's camp. Dongshuan's follow-up troops who were about to reach the top of the fort retreated like the tide, not lingering for a moment longer. According to the original plan, Qiu Jianhan, who was supposed to be at least 200 miles away from the Fortress of Resilience, had led his army and arrived abruptly like a divine army, descending from the sky at the most critical moment of the Fortress of Resilience. He had stabilized the situation and reversed the hopeless situation of the Fortress of Resilience's inevitable fall. Knowing that Qiu Jianhan had arrived and that the situation was hopeless, Han Sanhe, who was no longer able to attack, had ordered his troops to retreat at once. However, when he gave the order, he sighed deeply. Only a step away. Only a step away. At most, if Han Sanhe was given another hour, the Fortress of Resilience would be Dongshuan's. By then, even if Qiu Jianhan were to come, it would be futile. It would be impossible to reverse the situation. Why was it that at this delicate moment, the person who should not have appeared here suddenly appeared? Was God really blessing Yutong? No matter what, it was meaningless to continue fighting today. Dongshuan's troops had retreated. The entire Fortress of Resilience cheered in unison. Countless soldiers who were guarding the fort plopped to the ground as they cheered, unable to get up no matter what. The deafening cheers rang through the top of the fort. Today is Hua Manla's birthday, and it's our beauty Ling Piaoping's birthday too. Let us wish both of them a happy birthday. I almost died of frustration today. I quarreled with my wife the entire day. I slept last night and didn't log off my QQ. When I woke up this morning, my wife was hugging my phone and looking at me coldly. I was curious and asked what was wrong, but she insisted, "You have a mistress." I was dumbfounded. What? The evidence was clear. 2 messages had been sent by the same person on QQ. First, Feng Ling, I hate you. Second, you made me cry the entire night. I'm getting sadder and sadder. How could you do this? I wanted to cry, but I had no tears. I tried to explain to my wife. This is a touching story. My wife doesn't believe me. So I called her on QQ directly. Once the call was picked up, I was even more dumbfounded. It's really a girl's voice. What's more, the first sentence was, Master Feng actually sent me a voice message. Feng Ling, I love you. Sister, your love is killing me. Inexplicably, a song suddenly popped into my mind. Andy Lau's, Thank You for Your Love. Chapter 480. The white silhouette who had appeared at the very last moment to protect Fu Baogua was, of course, Bai Yixue. Of course, it could only be Bai Yixue. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan had sensed the suffocating tension when he entered the Fortress of Resilience with his years of danger sense, and had immediately asked Bai Yixue to assist Fu Baogua to ensure his safety. With Bai Yixue's current cultivation base, it was beyond his ability to turn the tide of the war. But it was not an easy feat to protect a person and retreat from the current war. That was why he had soared through the rain of arrows and entered the battle to save Fu Baogua. Bai Yixue's capabilities could probably be considered one of the top 10 swordsmen in the world. Comparing him to Jun Moyan, well, it was still incomparable. The gap between him and Jun Moyan was still. However, Bai Yixue, who was already at the 6th heaven realm, was already at the pinnacle of this world. Although he was not at the pinnacle or the pinnacle, he was already at the pinnacle. His standard was similar to the 5 venerable lords. After the war, Qiu Jianhan patrolled the entire Fortress of Resilience. Even with his old but determined personality, he could not hold back his tears. The entire Fortress of Resilience could no longer be described as a scene of devastation. Perhaps it was not enough to describe it. The Fortress of Resilience had been completely destroyed. It was a scene of devastation and decay. Countless injured soldiers were snoring by the side of the road, their faces filled with exhaustion that could not be concealed. The wounds on their bodies were still bleeding, but they were sleeping so soundly that one could not bear to wake them up and heal them. There were also the veterans on the street. Although they said they were walking, they were dragging their legs. It was as if their legs weighed 1,000 kilograms and couldn't be lifted at all. Their faces were filled with indescribable fatigue and numbness. If they could sit down now, they would immediately snore and sleep for 3 days straight. There were not many buildings in the fortress that could still maintain their shape. In a siege, offensive weapons were used in every way possible. It was the same for defense. The best defense for the defending side was rolling logs and stones. Otherwise, when Fu Baogua had sent the steel cavalry to battle, he would not have asked the steel cavalry, who were tasked with heavy responsibilities, to bring back a piece of stone and a piece of rolling log each time they resupply, in exchange for supplies and arrows. However, the steel cavalry's replenishment of the logs and stones needed to defend the fort was utterly inadequate. The biggest replenishment could only come from the Fortress of Resilience itself. The building materials, beams, pillars, foundation stones, and tiles were all used. After the fierce battle, there were not many intact houses left in the Fortress of Resilience. It's too tragic. It's too tragic. Qiu Jianhan heaved a long sigh towards the sky, channeling everything he saw and the grief and indignation in his chest into his sigh. Fu Baogua, who was already exhausted and thin, did not go to rest immediately. Instead, he was supported to the marshal's hall, his legs trembling and his face pale, without the slightest hint of blood. Fu Baogua continued to recuperate and rest. It would be best if he could sleep for 3 days and 3 nights consecutively, but he persisted. He had to at least finish explaining the current situation to old Marshal Qiu before he could rest. Seeing Fu Baogua's pathetic state, Qiu Jianhan hurriedly stewed a 500-year-old ginseng that he had brought for Fu Baogua without another word. Only then did the injured and exhausted Fu Baogua look slightly better. "How's the current situation? Finish quickly and go rest," Qiu Jianhan asked. Fu Baogua's expression was ghastly. He knew that old Marshal Qiu would ask this question, and was mentally prepared for it. However, the moment the question was asked, the piercing pain in his heart struck him once more. His voice was hoarse as he closed his eyes. "When this lowly official first came to the Fortress of Resilience, I brought 100,000 soldiers, 1,000 janissaries, and 300,000 soldiers, who were originally guarding the Fortress of Resilience. That's a total of 415,303 brothers. The logistics personnel that followed were 108,600 people. After that, we received reinforcements one after another, including martial artists and even citizens who came spontaneously. For the past 2 months, there have been more than 60,000 brave men who came from all walks of life. These people include local armed forces, people from sects, martial artists, veterans, and young citizens, a total of 63,148 people. 150,000 brothers from the Western Line have come to our aid. Our total number of soldiers is 723,251 people. Up until now," Fu Baogua was sobbing in agony. 150,000 steel cavalrymen. There are only 93,000 of them left. The 30,000 fist troops have not been mobilized. The remaining defensive forces, including all the military branches, are only left with 179,409 people. Among them, there are also injured and disabled patients. Once Fu Baogua said this, Qiu Jianhan and all the reinforcements present paled. 420,000 people? Qiu Jianhan's voice was hoarse. "No, it's 420,842 people." Fu Baogua's expression was blank, but tears were falling from the corners of his eyes. The entire hall suddenly fell silent, so silent that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. At this moment, Almost everyone felt as if their hearts were clenched tightly, as if they could not breathe. This number is still increasing, Fu Baogua said. Fu Baogua said, the medicine we've stored has long been used up. Now every day, every hour, every breath, there are many gravely injured soldiers dying. Some of them are gravely injured, some are incurable, dying from blood loss, and some are barely hanging on. Now that the threat of the fortress of resilience has been lifted, they can't hold on any longer once they let out a sigh of relief. Qiu Jianhan stood up, his expression grim as he said, I've long been prepared for this. We've brought enough medicine for this trip, a total of 1,200 carriages, as well as 3,200 healers. We've begun to act now. We'll do our best to save the eastern troops wounded. Shangguan Lingxiu, Qiu Jianhan ordered. This lowly general is here. Shangguan Lingxiu stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Raise the flag of the Shangguan family of generals. Let our brave brothers see that the family of generals still exists, at the eastern line today. Qiu Jianhan said solemnly. Yes. Qiu Jianhan turned to look at Sun Zihu and said faintly, Sun Zihu, if you can make it back alive after this battle, tell Marshal Wang Yunju. The soldiers under his command must be obtained. They didn't embarrass your father. The reputation of the Western troops elite is well-deserved. Their desire to protect the nation and the people is not inferior to anyone. It was a very plain compliment, but it made Sun Zihu's tears flow like a broken dam. His voice was choked as he said, Thank you, old Marshal. This lowly general will report this to the Marshal without missing a single word. Qiu Jianhan hummed and thought for a long time before he said slowly, Since I've said it, I might as well say one more thing. Tell Marshal Wang that after this battle, whether this old man is dead or alive, ask him to go to the Qiu residence to kowtow when he returns to the capital. You Sun Zihu come along as well. Yes. Sun Zihu was almost roaring as he knelt on the ground and kowtowed twice. Sun Zihu kowtows to the old man on behalf of the Marshal. You'll definitely receive the Marshal's kowtow in the capital one day. Qiu Jianhan smiled and nodded. This rumored Sun Zihu was a smart man, able to understand the meaning behind his words. Very well. When others called Sun Zihu, Sun Zihu would be displeased, including Marshal Wang Yunju, who had been calling him that for almost a decade. However, there was only one person in this world who called Sun Zihu Sun Zihu. Sun Zihu would feel honored and overjoyed. This person was Qiu Jianhan, old Marshal Qiu. It was not that Sun Zihu was especially willing to be Marshal Qiu's grandson. But there was another layer of history. Almost everyone in Yutong's higher echelons knew that the Western troops' marshal, Wang Yunju, was actually old Marshal Qiu Jianhan's favorite pupil. More than a decade ago, when Wang Yunju was still a deputy general in the military, he had disobeyed the military order and did not return on time. Later on, it was discovered that this fellow had secretly gotten married during that period of time, and his bride had even been snatched away. Disobeying orders and marrying in the midst of a battle were both major crimes in the military. Wang Yunju had committed two major crimes at the same time. As his teacher, Qiu Jianhan was enraged and punished him with 100 strokes, and sent him to the western border to start as a laborer. He had even chased him out of the school, and ordered him to never call himself Marshal Qiu's pupil ever again. Under normal circumstances, there was a 99% chance that Wang Yunju would never be able to make a name for himself in this lifetime. What mattered the most at that time was one's family background. A person who had been chased out of the school, and whose teacher was an abandoned disciple of the highest echelon of the military, would never be able to make a name for himself again. Therefore, no one had expected that Wang Yunju, who had fought every battle on the western border, without a care for his own life, would actually rise to the position of the Western troops' marshal in just a dozen years. Qiu Jianhan had learned the truth of the incident later on. It was that Wang Yunju's fiancée had been fancied by a rich popinjay, who wanted to force her to be his concubine. Qiu Jianhan's father-in-law, who was greedy for riches, had gone back on his word and agreed to the man's marriage proposal. How could Wang Yunju tolerate such a situation? In a fit of rage, he had charged into his father-in-law's house with his men, snatched his wife, and ran away. They had even held a banquet that very night to marry each other and enter the bridal chamber. Although there was a reason for the incident, and both parties were indeed in love with each other, the truth was that he had still taken a woman by force. His father-in-law had reported the matter to the authorities. After learning the truth, Qiu Jianhan had annihilated the popinjay's entire family in a fit of rage. However, he had never allowed Wang Yunju to return. What was done could not be taken back easily. His master at that time could not be wrong. Even if he was wrong, he was right. Whenever Wang Yunju returned to the capital to report on his duties, he would kneel in front of Qiu Jianhan's residence. However, Qiu Jianhan had never opened the door. This matter could be said to be Wang Yunju's greatest regret. Since then, Wang Yunju had fought fearlessly and loved his soldiers like they were his children. However, he had been cursing incessantly, calling his mother and father all the time. He had also learned from his teacher Qiu Jianhan. It could be said that the current Wang Yunju was almost a complete copy of the younger Qiu Jianhan. As he was promoted year after year, Wang Yunju would always discuss with his trusted subordinates before he returned to the capital. Help your father think. How can your father marry into the old master's house? However, no matter how Wang Yunju had tried and calculated, he had never been able to fulfill his wish. This had also caused Wang Yunju to have an inferiority complex. An abandoned disciple. The generals of the western border knew their marshal's sore spot. As the most trusted subordinate, Sun Zihu naturally knew the source of his marshal's pain better than anyone else. Even when he met old Marshal Qiu personally, Sun Zihu did not expect the old man to allow his marshal's return. He had just met old Marshal Qiu, and before he could say anything, he had not expected the old man to allow his marshal to return. His emotions were turbulent at this moment. He wanted to burst into tears to vent the frustration in his chest. Qiu Jianhan sighed. Just because of such a small matter, he was too ashamed to sheath his sword. No matter what, he refused to take back his order. He had been wasting his time until now. He had suffered for himself, that child Yunju, and all the people around him. It was all his fault. Sun Zihu could no longer hold himself back. He excused himself and went out to write a letter. The eagle sent the letter, sending the important news immediately. He could imagine how the marshal would feel when he read the letter. What if he were to die in this war? It was fine if he were to die, but such explosive news had to be sent back to the western border as soon as possible. This was the benefit that the marshal had earned from the western troops' outstanding performance this time. That fellow must be crying. Sun Zihu chuckled as he recalled the emotional words he had written, glancing to his left and right guiltily. I wonder what the marshal will look like when he cries. How ugly will he look? Just thinking about it makes me happy. I've been counting on this to live my entire life. No, how can I die? So be it. I must survive this war. Only then can I hope to see the marshal's pathetic state with my own eyes. Marshal Qiu said just now that this grandson of his is to follow the marshal to visit him. I'm qualified to see the marshal's pathetic state with my own eyes, a witness of this moment. I must live on. Sun Zihu made his wish inwardly after daydreaming for a long time. It was said that a woman's mind was not to be guessed, nor was a man's. Who would have thought that Sun Zihu, who looked tall and strong, would have such a meticulous mind? The flag of the Shengguan family of generals rose slowly. This was the first time in many years that the flag of the family of generals had been raised again. All the veterans who were still awake stood up in unison when they saw the flag. No matter how weak they were, they held on, mustering the last bit of energy they had left to stand up. On the flag that was embroidered with the crimson flying dragon cavalry, there was a long spear that was about to pierce through the heavens. It had long attracted everyone's attention. The veterans' expressions turned serious at once. They adjusted their postures to maintain the most standard stance before raising their hands to salute solemnly. In his eyes, he couldn't help but tear up. The flag of the Shengguan family of generals has finally appeared on Yutong's battlefield again. Chapter 481. Most of the new soldiers did not understand the meaning of this flag. The veterans around them first forced them to salute the family of generals' flag, before they began to narrate and describe the past of the Shangguan family of generals bit by bit. 99% of the new soldiers saluted the flag once more with sincerity and sincerity. Is there a problem with the wall? Qiu Jianhan listened to Fu Baoguo pointing out the flaw in the wall. Both of them went to the spot where the problem was and bent down to take a closer look. For a long time, old Marshal Qiu did not straighten up. This old marshal, who had been through hundreds of battles and was best at military affairs, could see the problem clearly. The flaw in the wall was no longer the initial protrusion of a palm, but it was almost half a foot. With such a hidden threat, Yutong would not be able to last more than 5 days, even if their reinforcements had just arrived and their combat power was at its peak. Such a flaw was fatal. It had a great bearing on the morale of their own soldiers. Bai Yi. Qiu Jianhan called out to Bai Yixue and said hopefully, "It's this rock. With your cultivation base, can you?" Bai Yixue peeked over and pondered for a moment, before he finally shook his head softly with a pained expression. "If it's just this rock, I can easily push it in. However, I can't guarantee that the rock that's pushed further away can be restored to its original state. It's more likely that when I push the rock, not only will it be useless, it will also shake the surrounding rocks, causing the wall to lose balance and become even more unstable." Bai Yixue's words extinguished Qiu Jianhan's last ray of hope. He understood what Bai Yixue meant. All the rocks that made up the wall were pressed together tightly like a single entity. Although this protruding rock had caused a flaw in the wall could still hold on for a while. On the other hand, when Bai Yixue pushed this piece back to its original position, it would look like it had returned to its original state, but it would actually cause problems in other areas that did not have cracks due to the immense pressure. If those cracks were to appear, the consequences would only be more fatal. If there was some time for Bai Yixue to push the rock in and repair the cracks, it could be done in a short amount of time. However, would Dongxian give Yutong the time? Impossible. Fu Baoguo's expression darkened. He had thought that the old marshal's arrival would change the outcome of the battle, but he was still at a disadvantage. He asked softly subconsciously, "Old Marshal, may I ask, when will the 9 Supremes Lords come?" This was what worried Fu Baoguo the most, and it was also the most direct way to get out of this predicament. Qiu Jianhan felt a stabbing pain in his heart. He could not help rebuking, "Fu Baoguo, what are you thinking? Could it be that Yutong doesn't have the 9 Supremes anymore, and you won't fight anymore? Must the 9 Supremes be the one to end Yutong's war?" Fu Baoguo lowered his head and said with difficulty, "Old Marshal, this battle is unusual. Our brothers were beaten too badly." Qiu Jianhan was silent for a moment before he said softly, "How could I not know the devastation of this battle? But the 9 Supremes Lords, perhaps, this time, they really can't come." Fu Baoguo's expression changed at once. He knew very well what the old marshal meant. With the 9 Supremes Lords' speed, temper, and character, how could they not be here? If they really couldn't come, then there could only be one possibility. It was a possibility that Fu Baoguo dared not think about. According to the information from before, an enormous lake suddenly appeared in the boundless mountain range, 6,500 kilometers, southeast of here a few days ago. The surrounding mountain ranges were all razed to the ground, and all the trees and rocks were shattered into pieces. It was as if they'd suffered a heavenly tribulation, and it was a scene of desolation. The old marshal closed his eyes and said, "There must have been a great battle there." However, the number of participants was definitely not many. From the southern border to the eastern defense, that route is almost a necessary route. It's obvious that this battle was set up by someone with ulterior motives against the 9 Supremes. After this battle, there has been no news of the 9 Supremes Lords. Fu Baoguo was dumbstruck. Even if it was Qiu Jianhan's explanation, how could he not understand the deeper meaning of these words with his military knowledge? What was more, he was someone who had experienced the Four Seasons Tower's methods that were beyond his knowledge. His heart turned bone-chillingly cold. Qiu Jianhan heaved a long sigh. According to the time, it has been about 20 days since Lord Supreme Cloud left the southern border. It was also after that the lake appeared. In other words, Lord Supreme Cloud's battle there lasted at least 20 days. Since then there has been no news. Although no news is good news, but, listening to Qiu Jianhan's words, Fu Baogua felt like the sky above his head had collapsed. While the walls of the Fortress of Resilience were in an irreversible state, Lord Supreme Cloud had also encountered a terrifying ambush. Baogua, Qiu Jianhan said in a low voice. This news must be kept confidential. Only you and I know about it in the whole of Yutong now. His Majesty Old Lung and Feng Taiwei know about it. Fu Baogua answered mechanically. This humble official understands. Though he agreed verbally, Fu Baogua's mind was already a complete blank at the moment. The person who had made the promise that day was probably no longer around. Who was he going to fulfill his vow to? Other than the main reason why he had persevered all this while, which was to fulfill his duty as a citizen of Yutong. Another reason was to let Lord Supreme Cloud know that his mercy that day was not wrong. He had given everything he had, protecting the Fortress of Resilience with his life. Now, however, the wall now. Qiu Jianhan was hesitant. Fu Baogua, on the other hand, grabbed a handful of snow and rubbed it harshly on his face and neck a few times. It was only then that he felt calmer. After stewing for a while, he finally suggested. Old Marshal mentioned the last move. I wonder, what about the last move? Qiu Jianhan's face was weathered. This old man is thinking about the last move now, Fu Baogua said. May I ask, Old Marshal? This, Qiu Jianhan said with difficulty. This last move can make the Fortress of Resilience last for another month. It's impossible for it to last any longer. Even if I were to use this move, this old man still doesn't have the confidence to really last a month against Han Sanha. Fu Baogua perked up. Last for another month? Is it really 1 month? Hearing the number, Fu Baogua's eyes glowed. Even holding on for one more day was an extravagant hope to Fu Baogua now. How could it last for another month? Now that he heard the words of holding on for another month, Fu Baogua felt like he had come back to life. In spite of this, Qiu Jianhan's expression was grim. If he had a choice, he would never want to use this last move. Once this move was used, the Fortress of Resilience, the publicly acknowledged unbreakable fortress, would not be able to be used again for a long time. Perhaps it should be said that it would be destroyed. May I ask, Old Marshal, what method is this? How can it be so effective? Fu Baogua asked excitedly. On the opposite side, Han Sanha stood on a high point with a thick fur coat draped over him. He frowned as he looked at the Fortress of Resilience from afar and sighed faintly. Teacher, the wind is strong on the mountain. Let's return to the marshal's tent, Zhang Ge said. Let's wait a little longer. I want to see if Qiu Jianhan will actually use that method, Han Sanha said slowly. That method? What method? Zhang Ge asked, puzzled. The last move. The last move to deal with the current crisis. Han Sanha chuckled humorlessly and said, I didn't expect to meet Qiu Jianhan after all. I thought that Fu Baogua wouldn't be able to hold on for more than a few days. I didn't expect him to be reborn when I actually met him. Each of his moves were precise and orderly, and they were more appropriate than I imagined. Fu Baogua has really grown up. If he survives this battle, the title of Tianxian Continent's top general will probably change hands. Teacher, aren't you flattering Fu Baogua a little too much? As long as teacher is still alive, the title of Tianxian Continent's top general will never fall to anyone else, Zhang Ge exclaimed. Although Zhang Ge had fought Fu Baogua before, and had personally experienced Fu Baogua's prowess, he had to admit that he would never be able to do what Fu Baogua did if their positions were switched. However, Zhang Ge still did not agree that Fu Baogua could replace Han Sanha as the next top general of the continent. Han Sanha paused and said, Do you know why I've chosen to increase the number of troops despite the heavy casualties? To continue the war? Zhang Ge said, Please tell me the details, teacher. Zhang Ge could not understand this as well. The current war was not on Dongshuan's side. The right time, the right place, the right people. However, his teacher had sworn to fight to the death no matter what. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.